Joint discussion with Parks Commission.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Back in 2024, the Parks Commission, we put together a brand-new Parks Master Plan. Part of that Parks Master Plan, one of the first items on the agenda there was to seek and add a Parks Director position to staffing. That was part of the 2025 work plan, which was also reviewed with Parks Commission as well as City Council in January of 2025. Issue before us tonight for discussion, we do have all members besides one of our Parks Commission here tonight. Does the City Council support the need for the Parks Director position for the City of Lake Elmo? Did meet with the Parks Commission on several occasions where to discuss what type of level of service the city would like to see or what we're lacking in our Parks Division. We put together 6 things that they felt our Parks Department is lacking at this time. One was recreational programming. The second was increased community engagement. Third was securing funding, exploring additional funding resources for the Parks Department. Creating a long-range strategic plan, coordinating and developing and implementing a trail network, greater network within our community, and environmental stewardship. So for the discussion tonight, we're looking for direction on what type of level of service does the community expect, and what type of services City Council support as well.
Comments?
I would be curious from the commissioners, in terms of these 6, do you see them as being pretty equal, some weighted more than others, some different in terms of time frame? Because there's different ways that we can ingest this, and when it comes to implementation and rolling out, I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that. Any and all.
I don't think that we really discussed priority there. Good question, though. I mean, I think that a lot of them, in my opinion, a lot of them go hand in hand, right? Like, I think that if you secure funding through various additional means, if your position is doing that, then you can do more recreational program. Then you can do more community engagement with that. Community engagement also, feeds back into more programming. And so I think that, like, it feels like a nice package to me. But other commissioners might have other ideas.
I would just add to that, some of this, because the master plan had multiple positions that it recommended, and one was this Parks Director position. There was also a program manager, so, at some point, there will be a need probably for a lot more of that. So like the program management, recreational programming is a piece of it, but that director position, to the point of, they're not probably all equal, because you couldn't do it all at the same level at the same time. But to just that specific point, it could be just even better understanding and getting it started, and then figuring out, okay, do we need that other position down the road? So it's package, but yet probably implemented at different levels.
And it's part of the strategic part, I think, is one of those bullets, is to put it all together and to come up with those priorities. There's more than enough work there, but you're right. There could be a priority scheme within all of those.
I'll also just add that I think that it's like one of the challenges in thinking about what's the highest priority here for me is that Lake Elmo as a city is, not even really coming close to the national level benchmarks. And is that a goal? No, not necessarily, but it just kind of says, okay, this is where we're at in relation to other park and recreation agencies in towns and cities of less than 20,000. Average has, or the median, not the average, has 3.7 employees. Lake Elmo, 2, So what we're doing is like very impressive for the resources that we have, but I don't think it really even starts to appear on the surface of like what comparable cities are doing.
Was that 3.7 or 13.7?
13.7.
13.7.
Yeah, so the thing that I struggle with, and so from living here in 20 years, is that Lake Elmo's, growing fairly rapidly. And then the back of my mind is always like, well, are we big enough for this? Are we big enough for that? So there's these continually, it's like a teenager going through growing pains, right? The knees kind of hurt and the hips kind of hurt, and trying to figure out when the right time is to do that. And traditionally, our city has been very conservative on adding positions, right? And maybe not maintaining pace with growth. So along with residents wanting some of these, and I might cut all, the parks, amenities, things that go with the amenities is a cost to that, right? And so dealing with that within the city, just being very blunt, it's a difficult task for people to say, yeah, I want to pay more for that. And so that's something that we try and consider moving forward. And, the parks strategic plan is good, and it kind of puts us in that direction. But we also want to maybe temper that with what can we do, right? And what's going to be palatable to a certain extent. I'd love to have a full deck Parks and Rec, but we probably need to piece that together over time, that has that thought process in place and is communicated effectively to the public that these are the costs to doing that type of business, right? But it sounds like we have the strategic plan, but we haven't really vetted out what those costs would be for the city, what the pros and the cons list. Here's the advantages, it's not really necessarily a con list, but this is what it's gonna cost to get those advantages. And everybody cool with that, right? So, that's just.
And I think that speaks to the need for the position, because otherwise it's not happening.
Right.
All those things, the priority and the timing and the justification and the communications, it's really not happening. It's never really happened, okay? Or we'll do it in piecemeal, or the staff will grasp a hold of it and they'll put a part together. But that's why this position is important, is because that's gonna lay the foundation. It might not go. They might get pushback that, no, they don't want a huge park system, or they don't want this amenity or that amenity. But this would at least start the process of trying to bring that integration, that planning, the strategic planning more together.
I'd like to take a chance at, or a shot at answering Commissioner Holtz's question too, as far as prioritization. I think, excuse me, sorry. The items we've identified really all fit into what the master plan outlines in more specifics. I think there's nothing that doesn't overlap there. So the master plan is something that was approved by City Council. It does have a number of recommendations and initiatives in it. They actually do outline costs and priorities, high to medium to low. So it's a good working document. Again, it was approved. And I guess to cut to the heart of it, those priorities are all listed there. We simply can't do a good portion of them, and this has been told to us by city staff, with the current structure we have. So we are, as our chair said, kind of stuck in going forward in any meaningful way.
If I can just add for the good of the group for this discussion, we have moved the needle a little bit on some things recently. We have our new communications coordinator, and we are just implemented using GIS. And so one of the layers is a park and trail system. So as we test it out, we'll be promoting that to the community so they can find the parks, and seeing the amenities. As also, we're just building out a facilities module on our new website where people, a self-service reservation system. So that's something exciting. And then also, and we haven't talked a lot about this, but it's pretty neat. We have staff internally that have taken on additional tasks through our community development department. The folks that keep track of the green steps, they've also started gold leaf reporting. And so they have developed a green team, which has staff from each department, and they have a work plan. So they're focusing on some trees and water conservation as they can, in addition to their regular job. So just want to throw that out there because not everyone knows that.
Thank you.
So I'm just, with the document here, is the thought that is if we add additional staff, those 6 bullet points, that's where the commission kind of feels maybe we're struggling. And if we add that position, having that person that's leading it, responsible for it, available for it, has the capacity to do it, that those improve. Is that what I'm looking at? Is your thought process with this?
The simple answer is correct.
Yeah.
So then I guess maybe just for me too, like, if you could kind of just talk through them, like that first one, like recreational programming, develop community recreational education programming for kids. I guess just kind of talking through, maybe, you know, what it is that you're hoping, how did it get boiled down to that, right? What is it that you want to see, some examples, and maybe kind of helping me understand as far as like with that additional staff, how do we work towards that? Or if there's a different bullet point that you think, you know, speaks more loudly to that, you know, happy to hear that. I think for me, that'd be helpful just to kind of better understand how those two play together.
I guess I can maybe take a stab at this. I think the programming piece, again, having the position might be able to set a foundation and determine what kind of programming you might need, what level of programming you might need. That doesn't mean that that person is necessarily doing it themselves. The position is not. Maybe not anyone from the city, but there's different ways to do programming, whether it's through partnerships or other agencies that are doing it. And this position will allow that person, I think, to research some of those areas where the programming, it might be working with another community, it might be working with Washington County to offer some of these programs and these events and those type of things. So I don't think it was meant that this position would do that, but create that framework where it could get started in some capacity.
And would recreational programming, is that like, you know, working with SCVAA, working with Stillwater Lacrosse Association? Is that?
In my mind, it could be, it's not just youth athletics. It could be, again, we talked about, you know, adults and seniors. We have all these wonderful parks. How can we better utilize them? Whether that's, you know, pickleball. I know we don't want to hear that word too close. But whether it's pickleball, whether it's a senior program, whether it's working with, like I said, the county doing fishing or things like that, that I think kind of a wide scan of that. And maybe we find that there's areas where we don't need to cover because it's being done in some other capacity, whether through community education. But I feel strongly that this position could identify those gaps or those areas specific to programming.
Okay.
So it could be working with the continuing community education program. It could be working with other communities in the area. It could be working with
The county does a lot of
the
programming.
county and using our
Yeah,
parks.
it's
for
not
those.
meant that the city of Lake Elmo is gonna have some, now maybe 5-10 years from now, that's needed. You
Right.
need somebody to specifically do that, but I think that was the intent. I don't wanna speak for all the commissioners, but I think that was kind of our thinking around that topic.
Okay,
Yeah.
that helps,
I
thank
mean,
you.
I can give an example too. Like my husband, he drives to Minneapolis. Like he participates in Minneapolis Parks
Sure.
and Recreation for soccer. He also, Woodbury has a program, he goes down there. Like, it's all investing that effort and energy outside of Lake Elmo. And it's not that we don't have facilities for these things. It's not that we don't have the body of people that are interested. It's just that programming doesn't exist here, and it's
Are
hard to
there
do.
programs like organized by Minneapolis and programs organized by Woodbury that he goes to?
pick up
Okay.
soccer that
Sure.
are on Sundays. Certain fee associated with it, right? It's just like a league.
Sure.
For adults, and of course there's league for kids, and we also mentioned leagues for programming for seniors. I think that these are all kind of distinct population segments that
Yeah.
have needs, and
Sure.
we have space, but no cohesion really.
Yeah.
Of
It's an interesting one, because I've been to other cities too, where I feel like it's kind of the opposite, right? It's all privately organized, organizations. I was just in Washington DC, and all over the entire Washington Monument Park, it was all these different sports going on, organized by a different company. But obviously, yeah, there are a lot of cities that do that too, and I just think it's interesting seeing the pros and cons of both of those. But yeah, no, that's good. That really helps me with understanding that. I don't, if everybody else understands it, we don't have to go through it, but I kind of appreciate that for each of those bullets. Like same thing with community engagement. I guess my initial thought when I look at that is, right, we have a communications director now who's doing a lot of great communications. Is that something that is able to be done by that role, or is there something that, again, specifically with a parks position director, where that would be enhanced? Again, if you could maybe just speak on that a little bit.
Well, part of that would leverage in with the first things, that the more programs you have, the more park-specific programs you have, the more communication and engagement you can leverage at that point. So part of it, they fit hand in hand. But, yeah, there's a good level of communication that goes out, but about a year ago, we had a board member who was under 30. In fact, I think he was under 20. We're not communicating with that group at all, he would say, okay? And none of the people around him, his peers or anybody, you're not communicating with those people. Now, we've added on some communication skills, so maybe that's improved in a year, but that's where we were at a year ago. Even though we were sending out the weekly email, and even though, there were other forms, here's a 20-year-old, or not 20-year-old, 18-year-old who says we're not communicating parks information to his generation. So that's one area you could work on.
I think the addition of the communications director has been fantastic. It's noticeable immediately. I think, though, the addition and the combination of the two and other departments, somebody that's leading the parks area can put forth communications and work with communications director to make sure that we're advertising and cheerleading for our park system, and also engaging with community members so we can make sure that people have the opportunity to be involved. Again, we'll try not to mention it too much, but pickleball is a good example of, that age-old, our residents saying, we never heard a thing about this, which is not completely true. We don't have to go down that too much, but having a communications director is going to help that, but having a park director working with communications about what's happening within our park system, what our potential plans are, what the implementation might be, in coordination with that can only enhance the city and enhance things for our residents.
And just moving forward, pickleball's okay to say.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. It's a good.
Just not too loudly.
Not after
It's
6
a
p.m.
great activity,
Okay.
and we experienced some, like I say, growing pains, trying to figure things out.
Absolutely.
I think we're in that process, right? So it's all right.
Good.
To add on to that, one thing that as a commission we've seen, at least as long as I've been a commissioner, is couple times a year, we get a donation. Someone wants to donate a bench or make another type of donation, and it's always really nice to hear how the parks have impacted people in such a way that they want to give back in that way. And we have this feeling as a commission that the like desire to have a bench or something like that is more widespread in the community, but coordinating that, facilitating that, letting people know that donations are that's an opportunity that people have is not, that's a very low priority right now, but there could be a lot of potential there.
We also don't have anybody that would be able to coordinate. I don't want to speak for staff, but I don't think we'd have anybody that can coordinate any sort of volunteer activities that we might want to have go on in the park, whether it be pick up litter or do invasive species removal or whatever it might be. That's something that I do believe can't fulfill just due to staffing.
Have you talked about the cost of adding that position and the organizational structure, how it would fit in to our current organizational structure?
Two things here. One, just to build on that, I think that we do have a really great example of the Sally Manzera Center, and they have a volunteer that coordinates volunteer efforts, right? And that allowed them to access the largest community grants that the DNR has given out at least a couple years ago. And so that is impressive. Like, that says that there is the hunger for that, but the coordination, like, it would be nice if someone could do that more as part of their job, right? And then to your question, the Parks Master Plan, page 87 lays out that the total compensation estimate is $120,000 to $165,000 per year. So I don't know if that's realistic. I don't know, but that's a starting point for that conversation.
I don't think we've discussed as a commission how it would fit in with current public works and staff. And I think that would need, that would need to happen as to what is the best efficiency and synergy for that and what would make sense so that we still get the best of both worlds to serve the community.
How you would structure this, do you hire a director, do you hire workers, do you hire whatever? None of that's been discussed.
And that somewhat would be for this position to help
Right.
craft as well, if that went in that direction.
Well, and I can clarify, the root of my question was more so because the Parks Master Plan does have high, medium, low. We have cost estimates, but they're not vetted. They're from professionals in the field who gave their best guess. But in the case of, I'll use an example, the connecting of trail networks, that itself is an item here, but even within the Parks Master Plan, that's separated by connections that are low, medium, and high, and the low ones are 8 years out. Whereas recreational programming itself, that's where I was kind of getting, where would we see, and maybe this is, the aspect of needing an additional parks managerial level position to help with now the implementation plan. If we're having a conversation about, say, recreational programming, and we're gonna say that is a responsibility of the city, and we're not going to go with a model where it's volunteer-based, that does compete with the interest of funding for connections. It does. And so that's the root of my question, because I think we all are aware these will compete against each other. So I just want to have a better understanding as to, and same thing with environmental stewardship or the community engagement piece. Obviously, we all agree it's fantastic having communication staff on board. We also have one. We don't have 8. We do not want her to be literally having piles and piles of requests because we've built them up over the last couple of years. That's not fair to her. It's great job security. But with that said, so that's where it's kind of coming from. But I fully understand that these, many of them are pulling it out from the plan and putting it at a higher level. But at the end of the day, we are going to need to prioritize as to how these things roll out. And maybe that is then a function then for having that conversation of a parks managerial level staffer. I just don't want it to be the same thing of, oh, now we have this, here's the 1,000 tasks that you have, and make it unrealistic either, because we can't do, that's not fair to our staff either.
If I were to name one on our list, I would put it at funding opportunities. I think we have it listed maybe as grant opportunities. I'd make it a little more broad. The master plan has in the appendix 2 full pages of funding opportunities outside of just regular tax-based, grant-based funding opportunities. From my perspective, and that's just mine, I'm not speaking for our whole body here, but that would be a significant portion of the time for any new staff member that's coming on for parks is to secure funding. So we could maybe get a grant to do, have a recreations personnel that could start that work. That could get funding for trails, that could get funding, well, the funding opportunities are there. We all know they're hard to get, but you can't get them unless you got somebody dedicated to going after them. And so, again, I don't even know if I might even put it at 50% of their job.
Question for staff, because I know with our wonderful new firm of Bolton and Mink, we had discussions of, one of the advantages with Bolton Mink is the ability to connect with grant writing and looking into what's available. We definitely were thinking of it from the engineering standpoint. Does it also apply for the Parks and Rec standpoint? Is that something where that availability of expertise and labor for going after grants applies, or is that such a separate world being in the Parks and Recs area that that's not something that, Nate?
Good evening. So my experience has primarily been with the transportation side in chasing grants. I know that we have pursued grants for clients in recreational opportunities in the past. I'd like to be able to get a little more information, though, if I'm going to provide more specifics to the council and get back to you on that.
'Cause I think a prime example then is the connectivity piece, since that's very roadway oriented. It's the right-of-way issues, like it's transportation plan, but yeah, totally understandable.
Yep. Trails typically fall under the transportation, it's bleeds into both areas, and so we look at them from a transportation perspective when we go for grant funding, but I will definitely follow up with the council.
Thank you, sir.
If giving a little information and like our own perspectives helps kind of illuminate what we're trying to communicate here. I think going along with what Peter said, when the contractor was bringing the parks master plan to us, I recall that they said, in other cities that they've worked at that have followed through and hired someone, they have brought in more money than it costs to fund that position, which I don't think, should not be a condition of employment for going down that road. But just kind of, I was surprised to hear that, but when you think about it, it's probably not actually that surprising. And I think overall what we're trying to say as a commission is we feel that the parks and recreation in the city could be poised to kind of go to that next level, right? We've got this master plan in place that just happened. We've got some new opportunities that we're going to be talking about and then, further down in this agenda that are happening. Like there's all of these things that are, have either just happened or we're kind of at the cusp of, and we don't have the answers to how all of these things fit together. And I think that it would be disingenuous to have us kind of creatively think on each one of these things and what they mean to us. But overarching, in this broad perspective, it seemed to us all that there was enough there that we, you know, Adam helped us prioritize that and bring this to you as an agenda item. And the specifics and semantics of things, you know, there's a lot of material to draw on in that master plan, in what other communities are doing, and Lake Elmo does not have to do exactly what other communities are doing. That would be silly. But that's just kind of what we're saying here, I think.
Thank you for that. Because the topic is, you know, level of services. Are there things from your perspectives where we're providing services and they're not being used? Where maybe we have an opportunity to recalibrate? Where we're providing certain things and, you know what, times have changed and we need to adapt?
Again, the answer is yes. One of the things I would go to is resources. We have a lot of underutilized resources. And so there's potential out there, okay? There are parks that I do not think that are being used to their fullest extent. And then there's other parks that maybe we don't need them as a park, okay? So there are some things out there as far as resources specifically that could be either leveraged or not.
So you're seeing it more from like a location standpoint?
A location, yeah, but that's one aspect of it. Especially as we talk about, we have a number of parks all over the place, but they're not utilized. Some are not even utilized. I go around traveling to them, you guys must too. There's some that are not, rarely if ever utilized. And those I think we should look at.
Agreed.
Kind of lead into the next one. I think that was a great point, though, about, honestly, with the grant and the funding aspect of it, I think that's a really good point and a really, something definitely very much in the positive column of bringing on somebody in this role, especially as we're talking about some of the stuff that we have later in the agenda here. I mean, there are a lot of options there, and I think that is, you know, kind of like, not that that's the prerequisite for it or the expectation, but that really, it can pay for its role by having somebody who's able to spend the time to look for these different funding opportunities and making sure it's, you know, for the right thing as well, and making the right decisions. So I think this is, I definitely understand the need for it, and I think especially as we talk about some of these future items just coming up here, there's probably going to be even more of a need for it, but then it's probably just, yeah, figuring out as far as kind of like, I can't remember who was saying, Jeff, you were saying from like if we just bring on one person and they have 5,000 things to do, is that really the right way? And so figuring out, you know, more of the details, but it does seem like moving in this direction makes sense as we continue. And I very much agree that we have this Parks Master Plan that we invested a lot of time and energy into. And I don't really want it to turn into the previous Parks Master Plan where, you know, we started with the new one and we kind of realized, you know, shoot, we didn't really do anything with this and didn't take action on it. Now, I don't want that to come off as everything in this Parks Master Plan has to happen. That's absolutely not what that is for. It's a guide and it gives us some direction, but I think it'd be a missed opportunity if we aren't having consistent engagement with that. Administrator Miller, I think you've done such a great job with our goals, right, of making that such a focus in every single meeting. It's like when you shine the light on it, those things happen. You kind of need to do the same thing, I think, with that Parks Master Plan, probably.
Agreed. The old one had dust on it.
You know,
Yeah.
so, the question, does the city council support the need for a parks director? I guess my answer would be, I support a position that is leaning towards that. Maybe it grows into a parks director. And I'm just thinking operationally, how we are with our public works department and how we have with our communications. Maybe it's, don't shoot the messenger here, but maybe it's like parks coordinator or something like that to start off with. And then when you grow the program and you get something and the city grows, and you have more resources to put towards that, then it maybe becomes a director position and you're doing more with that. And I guess I would support something like that to get the ball rolling and to vet that out. And then I would look to the Parks Commission to kind of decide on or help configure what that position looks like for the administrator to fit into the system. That would be something I could support on the front end.
I think that's good.
Our surrounding communities have park superintendents and park supervisors. as well
Right,
as
something along that lines where we can maybe get the ball rolling with somebody that's invested in finding some of these other resources to help the city out and program things for the, vast majority of residents, whether they're aging or younger, and work with other communities and some of those funding resources, like you mentioned, at the back of the appendix there, and research some of those and maybe get us on the page of, using some of those for the city. I mean, that's just my thought.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a good place to start. And maybe, at that point, you still need to prioritize what that role would be, focusing on of these 6 bullet points. Not that doesn't mean they do all of them, but,
Oh, no, all
still
of
give a
them.
little more.
And then 10
And then
more.
some, yeah.
Adam, your parks, the portion of your job that is dedicated supposedly to parks is 40, a quarter, is that correct, 25%?
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, so that means if we went with your suggestion, Mayor, so it would be someone with twice the amount of time in parks. And I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Adam, but it seems to me that 50% more is really not a whole lot. If we're hoping for that person to look into grants and looking at other things, it doesn't seem like 20 hours a week is really much time.
No, that would be their full-time gig. The thing operationally we stand into is, we have a public works director, and the people that take care of the Parks and Rec are all the public works employees, right? And a lot of times in these, I'll say them, larger cities than us, when they have a parks director, they have their own staff that take care of all the parks and those things. So what I'm looking at is somebody that would be geared, maybe that takes the yoke off of Adam's back, and they carry the full load of that. I guess that's what I'm suggesting.
Oh, I misunderstood you.
Not just a part-time person, but like, I don't know that we're at a point where a director is the correct terminology. So start the ball rolling with a park supervisor or coordinator, or, that was my thought. Yeah, go ahead.
An alternative thought is, I understand that for government positions, especially if you're adding a full-time staff, it's really important to know the sustainability of being able to fund that position is there. I work in state government, and what we do a lot of is temporary work out of classes or term positions, and that might be another way to think about if there is some room where we can pay to play a little bit in here, what's the most efficient and smart use of that for the time you have. Maybe it's, starting small and seeing if there's a need to ramp up. Maybe it's going in big for a limited time as a trial basis and then seeing what's next. I think we're in this phase where, I feel like the commission feels like the city is kind of poised here, and now there's a decision, do we do something? Yes or no? And if yes, I think that there's a number of creative ways that could look. This is just a kind of a starting point for us to have this discussion, which we appreciate.
Well, I would wager most of the people in this entire room are probably of the understanding that an additional position is needed. Like that, it's in the Parks Master Plan. We all understand the constraints that staff are under. We all understand the services that need to be added to keep up with demands of constituents. So I appreciate, I work for the state as well. I have not done a working out class lately, but I do recall the joys of that. I think, there's gonna be some point down the road where I'm not even gonna guess what year, where Parks is a separate unit and has its own staff. Like, that is the norm, but who knows when that is? What is the level of our tax base that's needed for that? What's the level of population? I do not know. Whether it's, again, titles can be determined later on. I think a more important question is the structure within the division itself, the department, how it's structured and what the responsibilities are, I think is probably the primary question. Whether it's called a program manager, a coordinator, an assistant director. Words are words, but it's about the job duties that determines how it's classed and what the compensation is and what the workload is. So I think that's the priority. Do they then have their own team? I would be curious for staff's thoughts as well. I mean, you guys have been thinking about this. Like, what are your thoughts as to how, when a position is added, how are you thinking about the organization being structured? Like, what are the options that you've thought of at 6 a.m. when drinking coffee?
I'll lightly talk about it, but one of the things that was one of our major discussion points is like, who is that person gonna supervise? A lot of times when you have those titles, there is a number of people underneath them, right? And so putting that position out there just wouldn't make sense if you don't have the staff underneath them to support or to direct, right? To make that parks that much better. So, I know in our last meeting, we did talk about the Rough Tellus report, they mentioned that in there as well. So, again, going back to your conversation is just, how do we structure that? I don't know if it's been really laid out, but it's definitely been in discussion, like you said, in our coffee meeting, so.
I think you hit it on, partly on the head there, Jeff, was figuring out the responsibilities of that position. Once you do that, then you know how it fits in and where it should go.
And with the integration with the rest of the works by the Public Works Director.
We'll also have to find funding within the budget because that position currently isn't listed within the budget.
Correct.
Correct. And we're talking about 26.
Yes.
Correct.
Take you that long to get somebody on board, probably.
Well, first you gotta figure out what the responsibilities are gonna
Yep.
be. Then you figure out how it fits within the organization based on those responsibilities, and then you'll kind of, based on those responsibilities, come up with for you state employees, the Hayes program, and figure out what the proper rating should be for that position.
I think hearing this discussion helps. After the Public Works Operational Assessment, one of our next steps is to strategically plan out the staffing for the Public Works Department. And then hearing the feedback from this discussion, we can start to think about how that would play in.
Okay. So that was the first question, or I guess that Jeff and I have spoken on whether we support something along those lines. Other council members want to speak to that?
I'm in support as well. I think the roles and responsibility needs to be fleshed out a lot more before I would approve anything, but I agree that another body is needed for a job like this, depending on what the role title is, what the responsibilities are, pay scale, that type of thing.
Correct. Okay.
I agree that I don't know if a director role for it right now makes the most sense to get started with it. I also don't know timing-wise. I think honestly, these next two discussion points that we're gonna have too, I think could have a big impact on the need for a role like this or not. Or I should say need for it or not, but kind of timing of it, maybe more so. But yeah, I think in favor of, to make sure the Parks Master Plan is being implemented and that the park system is improving, I think it makes sense. I think it's just figuring out the timing, and I guess I would lean more towards, yeah, probably more of a coordinator role or a, but not a director maybe to get started. More of the, not the dive in the deep end version of what you were saying.
Anything, Nick, council member?
Well, I think we have the plan done. It points out the need for the position, and I think we're going down the right road with it. We have some more discussion this evening about how that's going to fit into our plan for 2026, which is going to be fairly integral to getting this done. But I think there's a need for it, and as we grow and develop as a community and become more diverse in our services, having, proper people to guide them and make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. And listening to our residents is an important piece that we need to have.
So, just in the interest of time, with 50 minutes on that, I'd like to move to the next topic, if we've answered the question sufficiently enough for y'all.
Yes, okay. Next item on the agenda is park amenities and replacement. So this conversation was actually tabled after a discussion of implementing a new playground set at Lions Park at our last city council meeting. In your packet, we did provide the budget, and actually the CIP, the upcoming CIP for the Parks Division. So the issue, I think, for the discussion would be is, does the city council support the need for continuing to replace amenities, including neighborhood playground sets that was set by the Parks Commission? So we do have 14 playground sets throughout the community in over 20 plus parks. We initially set a buffer of about $150,000 for those park replacements, and those normally last about 20 to 25 years. Also in our CIP is a number of shelters. We listed those over the next 5 years. Those are we don't have an actual placement holder for them, but we have discussed in many of our meetings of our parks where they would be and if they would qualify for it. So I think we'll open that up for discussion of, what the city council would like the Parks Commission to start looking at in the future, and the ultimate goal of being fiscally responsible with their funds that we do have in hand.
So the discussion from last Tuesday was presented by Councilmember Holtz, and we agreed that, and I think it, in part to, is it Commissioner Holzer? What was that? Did I pronounce that right?
Holscher, yeah.
Holscher.
Yeah.
Your comment about, are these parks really being used, right? So we have, when developments were coming in, right, every development had its own park. Was that the right strategy or not? Well, we can ballyhoo about that all day and not come up with the right answer. But the question is, are we putting the restructuring new parks, do they all need the park systems? I would argue that no, they don't. So more of a focus on where they're important to be, fiscally responsible for the city on this turnaround. Unfortunately, the one that came up last week was the park in Lake Elmo Park, or the playground there, and we all agreed that is absolutely gets used quite a bit. I see kids on there all the time for various events. So I don't think that one's in danger. But I think that just got us into the discussion point. Maybe we should be a little more, I don't know if strategic's really the word, at where we're replacing playground equipment. Because it is a significant cost to replace those, and, it's gonna come up every 20 years. I think that was
And that's
kind
part of the
discussion.
problem for the last few years, is there was a long period of time before me when there wasn't reinvestment in this stuff. So we have been, they provided a matrix of the 20 years, and guess what? They all kind of dump into a small time frame.
Yep.
Okay? So a lot of these replacements were part of safety, okay? Now, there was the right answer for safety, but maybe not the right answer for the system as a whole. I would agree with that.
That's
Okay.
kind of the point I think that the council was thinking about. I don't want to speak for everybody here, but it kind of came up that way. And maybe we'd like to, a little better look at that as we look at the CIP in the future is, do they all need to be replaced? Are they the right ones? You know, I would argue that sometimes just putting in these local parks in these small places kind of keeps community from being part of the larger community. You got a micro community, you know, but people don't tend to travel outside of their development to go to another park if they've got a park right there, so. But you also want that accessible. It's a yin and yang, right? So,
Well, we don't have the interconnectivity of trails that would facilitate something like that, so that's
Sure.
another part of it that would fit.
But the saved funds from that could really be used for it, right? And I think that's kind of,
Possibility, yeah.
for me, I think the two big factors is, one, the financial side of it, right? I mean, if we're replacing playgrounds every 20, 25 years with 14 playgrounds, soon to be 15, I mean, we're looking at every year and a half replacing a playground at that rate, right? And that's $200,000 to $300,000 every year and a half to 2 years, where if that's the need, then, you know, great, like that it's a good investment. But the second piece of it is it the best use of all the parks that we have, right? And you know, like in the master plan, it talks about having it's about a park, not necessarily a playground, but having a park within 1/2 to 3/4 mile radius of throughout the whole city. And again, is that possible? You know, maybe not, but, you know, just even looking at that, like, not even looking at parks that just have playgrounds. I mean, we're far exceeding that in several areas. And so it becomes okay, yeah, there's the financial side of it. You know, can we cut this down so from the financial side we can save some of this? But then it also becomes well, what if we use some of these parks for some of the other needs that we have, right? Like there's the desire for a disc golf, there's the desire for the fitness center park, there's the desire for a skate park. And not saying that any of these are right or wrong, but maybe some of these parks would be better utilized for those situations. So, you know, as their 25 to 30 year lifespan comes up, instead of replacing it, do we look at, you know, instead of a $300,000 playground, do we look at doing the $25,000 disc golf, right? Is it actually a better option that's gonna get used more? We're not gonna put a pickleball court there, probably. But again, is there other options for what we use these parks for? And then to the comment, you know, about the trails, right? Like, if we're saving, instead of every year and a half, it's every 3.5 to 4 years that we're reinvesting in a playground. Well, I mean, that's nearly $1 million over that time of 2.5 to 3 years that we can invest in other parks options, right? And I think, so for me, it's kind of like a twofold. I think at the city council meeting, I made a comment that didn't really, I thought about it, and, you know, I've driven around and seen a lot of the playgrounds not being used by kids, and so I'm not saying that, like, there isn't a need for playgrounds. It's just, I think maybe what kids are using parks for and how they use parks is different. Again, that doesn't mean they don't use playgrounds, they use them. I see that more so now there's a lot of use of the trails, right, to get from place to place. I'd say more so by adults probably. And then from the youth perspective, I really see that it's become more of a, you know, the kids aren't biking to the playground with their friend anymore. It's their parents are dropping them off for a coordinated activity. Flag football, soccer, lacrosse, hockey, whatever it might be. And, you know, as much as I wish kids would go use the playgrounds more, I just feel like maybe the use of the parks is changing. And I think trying to serve that versus fight against it also makes sense to me.
I think part of this coordinator's position could be to do that, exactly that for us. We have a lot of parks, and what do we really need for parks? What equipment do they need that makes a smart investment? And we're not replacing playground equipment for $300,000 that hardly anybody's using. So making those investments smart. And if we do that, then we would have more funds available to put the connecting trails in. We have about $5 million here in the CIP. the park dedication fund had about $3 million at the end of 2024, and we have our, proposed $100,000 park CIP levy in our 26 budget, and we have more park dedication funds. So I don't think funding is going to be so much of an issue, given, unless growth stops altogether. But using that money smartly and targeting those investments where we'll get the most return for them and get their, their highest use.
I agree with that. The challenge is going to be, again, the way we grew this thing, is even though there's a park and it's not being used, the neighbors are very connected to that park. So just not supporting it or changing the layout, there's going to have to be a lot of community communications. There's going to have to be a lot of work supporting those kind of decisions. Probably the right decision, but each of those communities, just because we put them out in these little areas, are going to be attracted to that.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be a big challenge, I agree, and I think that's where, hopefully we can get community involvement too, around that time of, this is the cost, this is why this city's going in this direction, how else could this park be used? How else would this community like to see it be used,
And go in a logical, we'll make a centralized park, and it'll have all these great amenities, and there'll be these trails, and so you won't have to go to your park that's very small. It'll have all this stuff. Correct. There's an argument there.
We have that situation in the Royal Club. We have the tot lot over in Phase 2. It was in the development agreement with the city. Do you know how many children live in Phase 1 and Phase 2? There's 4 in all of Phase 2, and there might be 2 in all of Phase 1. And so the park sits there empty 99 and 100% of the time. The communication among the residents is, we should take the tot lot out and put in a resource that people will use, like a picnic shelter, something along that line. It's starting to buzz fairly actively. My point being, where we have these neighborhood parks, if we work with the residents and say, how often do you see use, how often do you use, and what would make it better for you as a neighborhood, what amenities would make that something you would enjoy and share, I think we can make it work as a communication thing, but it does take time. And again, this is something a coordinator would be able to do effectively, and we making smart investments that would actually improve the park from the neighborhood's perspective, because it make it more usable.
I think I'm hearing a couple different things as far as whether we're talking about parks or whether we're talking about playground equipment and whether we need more parks. The master plan, the comprehensive plan, and I think our work has been very focused on putting any new parks where they're needed, and there's two identified spots within the city. So I don't think that there's anything, there are some parks that are maybe do overlap a little bit, but I think we've identified the north central and the southeast corners as places that need a park.
I think it was just discussion primarily around the playground equipment.
Yeah, that, for me, for sure.
And since, yeah.
And the cost thereof.
And we are in the plus category for sure in playgrounds, with national standards, I think we're +6. However, we're deficient in about 10 other categories for other things, and I think that speaks to your.
It gives that opportunity.
Opportunity for new or different, varying, diverse activities. And I think the important point I'd like to make is those still cost money. So when I hear, well, we have to figure out how much we're going to spend and whether this is a good spending use of money, investing in our parks is definitely a good use of money. It is how we spend it. I think the master plan does also call for a playground in every park, which I think we've all recognized. Again, we're +6. We've recognized that the focus would be on those deficient areas. From there, it does kind of circle back to the need for somebody that's coordinating this. I know that the discussion did start with the Lions Park. Currently in that master plan, it does call for developing a long-range plan for Lions Park, a comprehensive plan. We simply don't have the ability for staff to do that, so we've focused on the playground. Is that the right decision? That's a well-used park, and $300,000 is, that's for that park. Most of these parks, Kleist Park was 125 or 100, so not nearly that, and I just want to clarify that point. We're not spending $300,000 for every park that we update. And again, to Hank's point, we're updating them because they haven't been updated for a number of years, and part of a coordinator could also develop a maintenance plan, a better maintenance plan than we had for some of these playgrounds.
And if this didn't get approved for Lions Park to get a new playground, let's say, what would happen with that park? Because it's, in your opinion, is it safe to use right now, Adam?
So currently, yeah, yes, it's safe to use at this point. There is a number of maintenance items that we have done with it in the past, but we have seen that it is shifting due to the frost spoil, so it wouldn't be a matter of time before it was just removed.
When would it be removed, do you think?
Probably within the next year or two.
Okay. So that's something we have to think about too, is does the council want to completely remove one of the top used playgrounds in the city? Would you consider that a highly used playground set?
The Lions one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, that question right there is what I've been kind of is what I was thinking when I saw this in the, packet, is, I think we've been we've been finding ourselves in this situation as a commission where it's like, okay, this has been out there for 20 years, 25 years, being used, being exposed to elements, it's getting weathered, maybe some slides have been removed. We saw that at Pebble Park already, where Public Works had needed to remove some aspects to keep it safe. We go out there, we inspect it, or, we're asked to go look at it. Sure, you see things rusting, you see, pieces getting worn, you see the change in elevation that's happened. And we've always asked or I guess, speaking for myself, I've come from the position of, okay, we're in this position where something needs to be done here. What are we doing? Okay, well, do we want to replace it? I don't know, but this is the option we have. And the other option, right, is to remove it. So still to spend some money to remove it. But I think that asking that question, is it safe? Maybe that can come first. And oftentimes the answer is no, right? Something needs to be done. But to figure out what's going to go there next, maybe that's the second question. Maybe the question is, how do we get this removed? And then if we replace it with something, what does that look like, is that second question, right?
Yeah. Part of the hard part with this was the council has had a years-long discussion, and you're well aware about, do we start to shift towards larger, more centralized, less number of playgrounds? Then in the long term, you get more bang for the buck. You have one or two really large ones and less of your $150,000 to $200,000 ones. Or do we continue to do your 130, your 150, 200 everywhere? And it just happened that this was the time when Lions is up. We are all aware it is heavily used. But part of our discussion was actually, should it be larger? Should this be the place where we start to focus on a centralized, it's not the right word, supersized playground, as we start to maybe have fewer playgrounds elsewhere, to have it more of a gathering place, to have it more of a centralized, that's the playground. And that's, I think, if, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that's where where Councilmember Hearn was coming from, that's where I was coming from. Not to not replace Lions, but is this the time now where we start the shift and focus in this direction? Because in the long term, that is a cost savings by having fewer but larger ones. And the disc golf is an interesting one, and as you start to say that, disc golf, 25 to 35,000. O&M on that is far less, even for a small playground in comparison. So I think long-term wise, what are options to make sure that we have opportunities for kids? And we have it split up by age groups as well in the plan, that they still have those opportunities, is a playground the only option? If it is, it is, thank you, but I'll be honest, I can only speak for my experience and those of neighbors. Playgrounds is not their thing. It is for others, but it's not for everyone. And so I want to be cognizant of that as well. We do have it in there. Yes, we should have a park within 10 to 15 minutes of walking distance. Absolutely. I don't know if a playground long-term is the thing that we want to be guaranteeing, as that's the thing that everyone has the closest access to. I think times do change.
Should we have some sort of community outreach like you had at the Lake Elmo Night Out about what the community thinks should go into Lions Park, whether it's playground or disc golf or a skate park, that type of thing?
Yeah, we potentially could. Currently, right now, we are in that process for Ridge Park. We sent out a community survey to 3 communities out there, just for the potential of that one over the next few years as well. So it's potential.
Maybe just like, in looking at the map right now of our parks with playgrounds, if we look at the areas where there's multiple parks with playgrounds, specifically talking here, if we're looking at, the playground side of it, and we're looking at that, we need a park within a half to 3/4 of a mile, we can reduce from what we have right now, 14 down to 7, where we're still keeping with the parks that are there, where you're not overlapping parks within a half to 3/4 of a mile. I obviously think that needs to jump up to 8. We need the Limerick Village Park or something in the south east corner. As that develops, that's obviously a need, because they're not going to be served down there unless we put something there. But I guess from my perspective is I do think I would like to see us move towards reducing the playgrounds down to a number that's closer to that 7, or at least following kind of with that in that the half mile to 3/4 mile radius, as parks come up for a need for repair replacement, which, like you said, we haven't done it, so now this is why it's come up, right? It's on the CIP for the next 7 years. We have a playground replacement, and let's make that decision now, so instead of spending $150,000 every single year on a playground that, maybe there's a better use for it there. I think now is just the right time to start heading in that direction. And, like when I look through it, I feel like Lions Park, there's Reed Park, there's Pilot Park, they're all within that half mile to 3/4 mile radius. Lions Park is definitely, it's the central location, it's the old village area. I think Reed Park could be served really well with like a fitness park or something else like that. They have the nice running trails there. Disc golf could be there. I've seen that done where they use the woods really nicely for disc golf. I think there's so many opportunities where we could use some of these other parks for other opportunities that we are lacking on. We're doing very well for playgrounds, and it's a short bike or a short walk from Reed Park to Lions Park. There's okay trail connection there. Could it be better? Sure. But this is just where I think it's trying to balance between finances, community needs, right? And also where we're lacking some of these things that the community wants.
So I guess, in the memo here, it's like, staff would recommend providing the Parks Commission with direction, need of future playground replacements and the addition of future amenities within our parks, which is kind of what Councilmember Hearn went over. So I guess looking forward, when you're recommending, the basic recommendation is that we would like a little more critical thinking on, instead of there's a playground there now, we'll just replace it. Can we, I'd like to depend on the Parks Commission to do that critical thinking on, yes, that makes sense, or no, maybe we should be a little creative and do something else there. I guess that's kind of where this whole discussion.
And I think it's good. I think the specified goals, 14 to 7, maybe that's not the exact numbers, but it's a direction, okay? That's helpful, okay? To do that critical thinking. So that, I think, those kind of guidance can be applied in the future going forward.
And it's going to change. I mean, I have this map drawn up right now where it looks like it makes sense to me, but 7 years from now, when that playground comes up for, being up for replacement, I think that's exactly the point. Is okay, well, let's look within this half mile to 3/4 mile radius. Is there another playground? Is this where we want that playground to be? Is the other one gonna be replaced 2 years from now? Does it make more sense to replace this one or that one that's a half mile down the road, right? And do we need both? Maybe we do, but, you know, I think it's trying to think about that. And it's gonna be something that comes up over the next 7 years, because like you've mentioned, they haven't been replaced. We have multiple that are 25, going on 30 years old. You know, they're showing up now, so we gotta make a decision on them, and they're not cheap. And there's some other really good options that are cheaper that might serve the community need better.
That good?
Yeah.
Great. So then we'll move on to Mr. Director Stopa on the sports complex, 76 acres. And really, the issue is here, does the council support community planning engagement, doing a financial analysis based on improvements starting in 2025? Does the council want to wait till 2026? Talk about the timeline. Should staff try to meet the August 4th, 2026 referendum deadline? Technical difficulties?
Just trying to get it set up.
Just hit it with a hammer. It usually works for me. What happens when you hit the unsmiley face there?
Yeah, I can do this. This will work. Have to sign it again? The second time?
Adam, did you sabotage him?
He doesn't want us to see his password.
That bead of sweat on his forehead growing.
Just call him.
We're in.
I was just about to cue up the Jeopardy music.
All right, here we go. All right, so today we're talking about the sports complex, the land that was recently purchased. The city, 76 acres. Most of my work so far has been just talking to other cities and seeing what they've done to build out sports complexes. And then also the sports associations, local, and what their requests are, what their needs are, just learning more about them. So background is that the city purchased 76 acres. If anybody doesn't know, it's just south of Sunfish Lake Park. You know, we shared a timeline with the council on how we want to move forward with this. And what we really are looking at are starting the community engagement planning, financial analysis for the implementation and long-term maintenance. That's one of the things that we think is crucial, is understanding what this is going to cost the city, and then understanding what options you have that may bring in more revenue, some options that could lower expenses, and then what does this look like long-term to the city. So the issue before the council, one of the things that we talked about, just trying to understand, is we have the money budgeted for 2026. We have some set aside for 2025. You know, do we want to get started, you know, after this meeting to, you know, jump to the next steps? We want to wait till 2026. And then we initially talked about a referendum if necessary. There's a deadline in 2026, but we'll talk about that more later and kind of some of the changes that I've seen in the last several months since we started talking about this project. So I talked to the three parks directors for Lino Lakes, Woodbury, and Maple Grove, just to learn from their experiences. and to discuss resident expectations. And most of the cities, the residents wanted improved ball fields and park amenities. And while Lionel Lakes has had some challenges, they're a smaller community, both Woodbury and Maple Grove have built multi-million-dollar sports complexes that were supported by their residents. And I would say, talking with Maple Grove, learned a lot from Chuck Stifter at Maple Grove and understanding prices, and I included those in the packet too. So we could talk about that a little bit more going forward. But Woodbury has two major complexes, and what they have built out is, I think one of them has like 24 fields, but softball, baseball, soccer, lacrosse. They're having a growing Indian population, so they're adding cricket fields too. And they've done this over a series of referendums starting in 1974. We talked about tennis. Tennis is located at the high school. Pickleball is really popular. But additional amenities that they're looking at are skate parks, handball, outdoor fitness, and archery. Maple Grove recently built 2 parks. They built it through a budget surplus and park dedication funds. The scope and the budgets were attached, and what they did was they partnered with their sports associations and looked at it 80-20. So if you're building in a park and the park's $10 million, they looked at if the baseball fields cost, a certain portion of that association would come up with 20% of the cost. And the way they were able to do that is provide 0% interest loans to those through the government.
Are those conduit bonds?
I don't believe so. I think it comes from their budget surplus and park dedication. They just wanted them to have skin in the game, so they were able to cover it, and they would pay it over those 10 years. Maple Grove claims, also, he wanted to state that when they built these, the sports complex, it has an economic impact, and that's something that you should also consider when we go through the study. What kind of economic benefit does it create to kind of have one big park? He also acknowledged that it's expensive. The expenses far exceed the revenues. Typically, it's like a 4-to-1 in Maple Grove. And both of them have large parks departments, so the populations are a lot larger. I think Maple Grove is around like 80,000 at this point, I think. Sports associations, that we started talking, everybody was talking about baseball. It was kind of like the main group to reach out to was Lake Elmo Baseball, and Minnesota Blizzard is a travel team. So we talked to Tom Edison and Luke Gappert at Lake Elmo Baseball, and then Adam Bartow with the Blizzard. The Blizzard is a large travel ball association that partners, has been talking to Lake Elmo about partnering. So on the call were Luke and Adam, and we discussed how they could partner together if this were to be built. Both associations have several hundred participants. The Blizzard has over 1,000 participants at their indoor facility in the winter. And their ideal design would be 4 to 5 fields, 2 high school type town ball size fields, lights, artificial turf. That's one of the things that came up, is the artificial turf is something that these groups would really like to see. So artificial turf, the reason for it is it allows earlier spring play, fewer rainouts, and less seasonal maintenance. I think one thing to know is if anybody has had kids play baseball or been a part of it, just maintaining the mound and just the fields in general, the dirt is really time intensive. That would probably require hiring employees to do something like that. The artificial turf also allows the fields to be used for both baseball and softball and potentially other sports. I mean, baseball, they don't like to play on softball fields. So with artificial turf, that solves that issue. They also mentioned it'd be nice to have one of the larger fields be a stadium. I don't, think it's a real stadium. It's more of covers and a PA system. It's not, something that'd be extremely expensive, but this idea that you'd have a stadium for baseball and for softball. And then Lake Elmo's baseball season is May through July, and then also take a break and come back August, September. But they were saying that basically April through October with the turf, they could play at the site. And we discussed if it were to open, they could potentially manage the baseball facility in season. So that's something we discussed when it comes to whether the city hires staff or how that looks. We discussed fundraising and prepaying for rental fees for the site, so it's similar to that Maple Grove model. And both organizations have some funding for the project. I think the reality of the project, and we'll get to this, is it's quite expensive if you're gonna do it the way that most people want and the other cities have done it. So I don't really see it as the money that they have currently is the capital expense. It's more of prepaying and having, 10-year terms for use of the facilities. Also talked to Stillwater Fast Pitch and Hill Murray School. We were referred to both of them. They're both really interested if it's built out. Fast Pitch has around 100 players in this association. They're interested in renting fields. Hill Murray also expressed interest in renting the fields for both softball and baseball. So if the two stadiums were built, they'd be interested in playing their games at the site. Currently, they have other capital expenses that they're working on the sports side. And then facility planning. So we talked to St. Croix Soccer. They referred the sports facility companies to us, and they provide an analysis. They would deliver a report, financial analysis based on different scenarios. Basically, it's, is it worth bringing in and adding artificial turf? Can you add more fields? What's the ideal amount of fields to drive the revenue? So it's looking at the expenses, the revenues, the maintenance costs long-term. And also looks at how the sports associations would fit into the site in terms of management and cost share. It would also help if we were looking at a referendum, and this takes about 90 to 120 days. This is an option for someone like them, not necessarily them. You saw maybe a proposal in the packet if you looked. It's just something I talked to, but having someone with that expertise of actually building complexes and running these scenarios makes a lot of sense in terms of the financial planning. And then also, I'm going to talk about really quick with St. Croix Soccer. We also talked to them. They're very similar to Lake Elmo baseball. They have funding, could maybe operate the soccer site if it was built. So the possible layout and costs would be 4 to 5 softball fields, 4 soccer/multi-purpose fields, artificial turf, lights. Understanding that the build-out would also have concessions, bathrooms, storage buildings, parking. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of grading. Stormwater reuse ponds would also be included. I think it's important to know that that's a large cost of this development. So even if it was scaled down without artificial turf, just grading it, adding the parking lots and the utilities is going to be a substantial cost on the site. If you've been to the site, it's rolling hills, and there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. Maple Grove built their facilities. They're 2 separate facilities, but they were over $10 million a piece for their facilities, and I believe that they were built around 2020, 2022. So what we're looking at, if building something like this, would be in the $20 to $25 million range. And then we have these referendum dates below for tax referendum. One in 2026, and the next one comes around in 2028. So the considerations really to go forward are artificial turf has a high upfront cost and replacement costs. It's lower maintenance, and it's easier for the sports associations to manage. Natural grass with dirt infields would still exceed over $5 million for, when you consider all the site work. And then looking at revenue and expense, we think cost benefit with number of fields is really important moving forward. And then other amenities that could produce revenue at the site. We also want to look at how many employees we'll need to operate this site. So the fiscal impact of the plan that we're suggesting is around 40 to 60. We have that budgeted for next year to the 60. And the council input was, do we want to start it immediately? Do we want to wait till 2026? We also are working on the National Community Survey, which is budgeted for 2026, so we want to incorporate that. And then, our recommendation is just, let's wait till 2026. I don't even know if we have enough time to do everything that we should do to meet the 2026 referendum. So we're kind of looking at more of like waiting 2026. If a referendum is needed, 2028. And then move on from there. But the next step would be to engage a consultant to start the process, which would include all the community engagement and asking residents what they want to see there. So I'm open for any questions, thoughts.
Councilmember Jackson?
Yeah, I think, moving forward soon would be a good idea, but, I'm kind of concerned because we talked, when we initially were acquiring the land, about community engagement input to determine what facilities you would actually have there.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like we've come to a conclusion, it's soccer and baseball and softball. What if our residents want something else? I don't know, we know what we gonna put in there until we go through the community engagement process and find out what are our residents willing to support if we have to go for a bond referendum.
I think one of the things too is there's probably gonna be more land for more uses there too, so that would be included in the community engagement, along with obviously soccer and baseball if there isn't support for that.
I think nice too with the soccer fields, especially like I was looking at those pictures, it looks like, I mean, it's multi-use, so it's soccer, lacrosse, football. I don't know about cricket, if that can be played on there. I do think it is, but that would be obviously the artificial turf. So was it saying that it would, the estimated cost would be around 5 million for a similar number of soccer fields, baseball, softball fields, if it was real grass versus artificial turf?
The 5 million, I think so.
That's the artificial turf really is the high cost.
It's very
portion
expensive.
where
I
it
mean, the
goes for
artificial
5.
turf on a soccer field is about $1 million per field.
Did you talk to the folks at, you know, that lead the baseball, softball, soccer about whether they wanted turf or grass?
That they-
So I know that turf leads to more injuries is what they're seeing, so,
So I asked that too, in terms of soccer. I know professional soccer, they like to play on grass,
yeah.
but I think they said they would prefer artificial turf. Because I think it just has to do with the weather, and they can play year round, not year round, but they could play for more seasons. And if it rains, it dries out really quick and you can go play. And you can host tournaments and these sorts of things easier.
Got it.
How do we think it could be used during the winter? Does that, I mean, if it's artificial turf, can you groom a ski trail around it? I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that.
Don't know, okay.
Cross-country skiing, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think there's several opportunities there. As far as timeline, of course, every year things tend to go up a little bit, so I'm more of the sooner than later type of mentality, but I also want to be prudent in how this is approached. I think there's some other financial opportunities if you're talking about soccer fields, and if St. Croix Soccer's in there, they're more of a private entity. If there's a leasing option of that land for them and they take on the, once it's graded and everything, the improvements go to them. If you do some sort of long-term lease or something like that, of course, that probably negatively affects anything that's related to lacrosse. But I think there's to Councilmember Dragis's point, there's a lot of land there, even if you do put in the drainage ponds and the parking and the ball fields, and you can put in, the parking lots could be used for, we know that the elementary school is going away. Maybe the farmer's market didn't have a place to go, something like that, or, I know of, I think I've mentioned it to people, my hometown has a little amphitheater in their park that has all these parks, and they have Wednesday night musics for, that businesses sponsor, things of that nature. I think it could include it, really make it not just a sports complex but a place for people to come together. And the thing that really concerns me is the parking that's needed, because it's not Johnny or Jenny's just parents that show up for the game. It's Johnny and Jenny's parents and their grandparents and aunts and uncles. So it gets you see the parking at some of these places crazy. And I know that the initial cost of artificial turf is a little jaw-dropping relative to regular grass fields, but I think that's not taking into account the overall long-term maintenance, and certainly turf only lasts for a certain period of time depending on how long it gets played, but it would be nice to see if they do this financial planning analysis, right? What does it cost to help maintain that turf grass with the chalking and the mowing and the watering and all that versus your upfront cost of the turf and then depreciating that over the 10, 15-year life cycle of that turf to then having to redo it. So I think some of those numbers have to be vetted out to be able to make a really informed decision.
And to the mayor's point, I see it similarly. It's not just a sports site, it's a community gathering spot. Maybe it's Friday nights are the muscle car show and there's 5 food trucks and you have people with their cars coming in and then that's the event. Saturday nights is movie nights. Like, it's that type of thing. And there's sports. So I see it in both ways because those are both serving the community, but I digress. In terms of the questions before us, I agree with Councilmember Dragisich. The feedback from the community is going to matter. And I'm wondering, because the way school districts do it, if they determine they need to go for a bond or not, is they most often will hire Morris Leatherman, who is the premier survey entity, and their specialty is asking in a very statistically sound way, what would the community support? So that's kind of like your second or third piece, because first you have to determine, what are we even considering? So I'm wondering, is it really 2 different types of surveys or community engagements to kind of preload it to determine what are we even asking first, and then do the financial planning work to see how this could work, and then it's that last piece before going for a bond, if it's needed. Would that be a rational way of how the Lego pieces fit together?
Definitely. I think that's one of the questions we need to understand is how fast are we moving, right? So if it's, let's do a study first and understand what people want and, understanding kind of the different pricings with the sports complex, so that's what people want. And there's other amenities, then we could go look at a really clear financial analysis. But that's just gonna take more time.
Yep.
And if that's fine, that's kind of what we just need to hear. Is
And I will say, because this is the first time we've really been able to have this discussion for months in an open session, actually probably almost a year. In terms of, the partnerships are gonna matter, I think we all know that, no matter the organization, whether that's the rental fees, whether that's maybe a lease. I have no issue with having that discussion with, does leasing make more sense? It still comes down to the language of the lease and the operational costs and who's responsible and what that looks like. I have no problem pursuing that. The world of 1980 or even 1974 when Ojibwe Park, we're not in the same world. O&M costs are vastly different. And interestingly, when they went for their referendum in 74, their population was roughly 8,000. And Ojibwe Park is 74 acres. The more you know.
Sad.
Da, da, da. But I have no issue with that lease conversation. And I do think moving forward, I think we all know it's probably, if this happens, it's a phased approach. So it's coming down to what is that first piece? What's that second piece? In a way that is supported and also helpful to all of our constituents.
I think it's a good conversation in that, we go through the process. What do people want in this park? What are they willing to pay for? And then we come to them, okay, here's the cost of them. And then a Morris Leatherman survey that says, the cost is, $20 million. Would you support a referendum for $20 million to include all these items? And if someone says no, would you support a referendum for $15 million that would exclude these items? Go by order of preference. People said first we wanted A, B, C, D, and then you eliminate the lower one, and you say, well, if we took out the bottom one, the bond would be $15 million. Would you support that?
Yep.
And so you can go kind of get a roundabout way and determine people's confidence level, because going out for a referendum on something that you don't have support for is just a waste of everybody's time.
Yep. Oh, I forgot. It hasn't been asked. I have no issue if we look to sponsorships as well. This is a large item. I have no problem having that conversation as well. I think the harder part is who pursues it, staff, mayor with his leadership and great speaking skills.
So are you
But
suggesting Jeff Holtfield and you're gonna put 10 million in?
you will absolutely get at least $1 for that, yes. But again, because the world is not, this is not 1970. Costs for these things are not the same. And the hard part, when I talk with neighbors about this, or even I talk with family members who are of a different generation, these costs, it's a whole different world. So I fully support having those conversations to find financial opportunities, and if sponsorships is a part of it. If it's going to be Jack Griffin Field, it's fantastic. He'll get $2 for it.
You know, early on in this discussion, we're looking at the land that we discussed how this is an investment for a long-term future. 50 years from now, people look back at this park and say, that was really a smart decision. We have this beautiful park, in the middle of our community that we can use. My little hometown of Chisholm, we have a memorial park that was built as a WPA project. It's 40 acres. It's there today. It's football fields, baseball fields, curling club, tennis, ice arena, you name it, it's all there. And it's kind of like the center of the whole community, and we look back at that and say, they were creating jobs in those days, but look at how this park has just gone on and on and on and continued to be used. Yeah, you have to improve it, but it becomes, a cornerstone of your community.
And just for some people that may or may not know, in the comprehensive plan, it calls out for a community park, but the community park is supposed to be located in the old village center area. I think we all know, given the prices of land and things of that nature and how the old village is built out, just finding a place like that. And I think Sophia, our planner, had gotten requests, and that you guys had done a search of different areas, and this was one of the areas that looked at as a possibility. So that's kind of why we're looking at this area. And it just, something as a community's growing. And if you look at the East Metro overall, and you try and find a location where you could, we have a great baseball community, and I'll just speak to that, because they can't have tournaments on 2 fields, right? They can't bring people into Lake Elmo, and you talk about some of the economic benefits of that. You've got the Health Partners Field, which is the Woodbury, near Bielenberg or whatever. And what else you have? Nobody has something like this around, and so I think the opportunities for a broader reach are great. Councilmember Cragness.
Do you know how long or the longevity of a turf field would be?
Yeah, it depends on how often it's played on, about 8 to 10 years.
Okay. So every 8 to 10 years, we'd have to do a $10 million, $15 million upgrade?
I would probably say it's like 8 to 10 million for turf, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the maintenance of grass and dirt would not come close to that over those 8 to 10 years of maintenance?
You'd have to run the numbers. I mean, it really depends on how many employees you need to hire to.
Right.
So the 2 concerns with grass are you would have to hire employees to maintain the dirt fields, the grass, drag the fields. Also, you may receive less money from the sports association, and you may lose an opportunity where instead of them managing the site because it becomes too expensive, that we would have to hire even more people to manage the site too. So that's something to kind of think about. So that's the question where we really want someone with experience of building sports complexes to run the numbers on what really is gonna, I guess, save the city money and produce the best product.
Wouldn't cost you as much in the wet seasons when we get a lot of rain, but the watering would be fairly expensive for areas of that nature.
Yeah.
I mean, all those factors play into it, but it should be vetted out.
Right.
Kind of get to the basic question, I kind of think start planning and the engagement in 2026, we're almost into 2025 anyway. And we can work this into our 2026 budget, and Jason can get into his 2026 plan for his department, and
Some of this worked into the 2025 budget already, though?
just carry it forward.
We had a
I
small
mean-
amount for 2025.
Yeah,
but
a small amount for
yeah.
2025, but there is in 2026 for this activity,
I guess,
right?
does it make sense to use any of the money that we budgeted for 2025 to get started with any
No, I don't
of
think
these?
so.
Okay.
Director Handler?
I would just
Hadley?
point out that I believe that was one of the projects that was gonna use fund balance. So from a budget standpoint, it's kind of a wash, or from a levy taxation
Okay.
standpoint, it's a little bit of a wash.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. So we'd start in 2026, not this fall. I
Okay.
mean, I haven't heard anything from the planning commission. I'd love to, Parks, excuse me, Parks Commission.
Well, the Parks Commission's planning as they're sitting.
Right.
Planning as we're sitting, no, I think this is.
Ink was writing notes furiously.
That's right. Move forward is the way to go, and I think the little shift between now and 2026 is minimal, but,
Okay,
and the due diligence that you're going through, I think is absolutely on target.
okay.
I think, though, again, that holistic look at what we really are thinking about there is really important.
For sure. Yeah, you get one shot at making it right?
Maybe another way to look at it is working backwards. If we start in 2026, does that make the referendum in 2026 possible still?
I really don't think so. When we
No.
first started, I put that on there because it was discussed, and I think it was in my initial timeline. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
put it out there, but at this point, I don't see how we
And
go
even
through
if
the
we
process
started,
correctly and make
started
sure
the
we get
process
enough.
now, you still can't even get there essentially.
Right, I
That'd
mean,
be
to
question.
get all the input from residents, yeah.
Okay.
So, legal question, is, when you say if a bond is needed, is that because the alternative is because so many other sources of funds were found outside of the community? Private sponsorship, future rental fees, that, or is it because the city doesn't have to go for a referendum to produce the funds for this?
That, I mean, both are possible. I think you, at some point, we need to make a determination.
Right now, we don't
Vet
know.
it, and we just don't know.
I guess that's just always kind of been the conversation of an item this large.
Commissioner Barrett?
So does that mean if the referendum fails, the city would step up and fund it then? You said it could be
Well, I
either or
don't know.
both?
We're speaking in really big, broad generalities right now. We don't even have the specifics to know if
Okay,
we would
let me back
need
up
to
then.
go to a referendum.
I feel like this is, how many years ago did we get the $1 million from 3M for Tire
From the
Park?
Royal?
Yeah,
It wasn't 3M, it was from the Royal.
okay, from the Royal, yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it
don't
would-
know what the.
You know, I just feel like we need to jump on
8
this
years
right away.
ago, maybe,
Yeah.
5 years ago?
No, you got the money actually about 2 years ago.
Well.
The actual million, you
yeah,
received the cash.
yeah,
Received it.
Received it, it was
Yeah.
committed.
They signed it in 2017.
But we've known about this for how many years, and I'm kind of, with the mayor, I think we need to jump on it and get going.
I
It's just,
appreciate
the
that.
timing's right.
You know, you have a growing community and just affords some great things, I think. Just keep looking at that word, community engagement. And
Yeah, I think this item speaks specifically to what we talked about in our first item, that this position would help move this along exponentially. And I think it's a high level of strategic community engagement that's going to be needed, and that's gonna need to take all hands on deck, I think, in terms of the public, the different sports groups, whether you pursue funding opportunities, what you talked about, sponsorships, naming rights, those type of things. So I think these last two items kind of speak to what we talked about first this evening. To keep those moving along, and I think that's what the commission is hopeful that we can start on this sooner. The costs are gonna continue to escalate.
Okay, does that give you your direction?
Definitely. Thank you.
Was that for this item?
That's it.
All right, well, I'm gonna call a point of privilege here, before we go into our next, item, which is storm sewer, give the Parks Commission, the Parks
They're
Commission
totally
time
staying
to
for storm
stay if they
sewer.
want,
sewage.
talk about storm sewer and budget.
I mean, that is the peak of awesome conversation.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, that's why we're sitting over here.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And we look forward to seeing you in a park soon.
Meeting back to order. The next discussion will be regarding stormwater utility fee with an equitability review. City Engineer Nate Stanley.
Good evening. I don't have a presentation here. I wanted to just kind of talk about the stormwater utility fee and some of the ways it's calculated and kind of get council's general thoughts. So just a little background on the stormwater utility fee. I did put a memo together. When I was writing that memo that's in the packet, I was thinking about two things. One is the calculation and the equitability, but also if the fee was appropriate, if that was something that council wanted to consider adjusting at this point. And by fee, I mean the unit charge that is kind of the basis for all stormwater fees. So at this point, I think we're just mostly talking about the equitability and the calculation. So if you've taken a look at that memo, just know that. So the stormwater utility fee goes towards a handful of things, all stormwater related. Capital improvements is one, but primarily it's been used as a maintenance allocation, is my understanding. And in the past several years, I don't think there's been a large-scale standalone stormwater project that the city has spent on. I think actually the biggest one is probably this year's culvert replacement project up on Hudson Boulevard. So some of the major costs for the stormwater utility fee are implementation of the city's MS4 permits and the programs associated with that, general maintenance related to stormwater, and the potential investments in equipment that's related to stormwater or management of streets, stormwater related. So looking at the fund, it does seem like looking at the calculation methodology, it does seem like there are a handful of things missing. In the ordinance, there's a handful of categories. I'm going to go through them quickly. It's residential. These are kind of land types and uses. Residential, agricultural, and then commercial, industrial, school, church, institutional, golf course or parkland, manufactured home park, vacant land, and then just a general statement on conditional uses. If you look at a lot of neighboring communities or others in the metro, you'll see some more specific residential housing types that are listed in a calculation, such as townhome, attached townhome, multifamily. A lot of these can be probably categorized in what we have under either a conditional use or a commercial use. But that was just one thing I noticed right away. Another thing I'd just like to note, fee related, is that Lake Elmo does seem to be kind of right in the middle of metro communities for what we charge currently per month. It's per unit, the unit charge. Again, I'm going to reference that because I think we're going to spend most of our time tonight talking about residential use. But that residential charge is $95 per year, and that'd be for a single family lot. Works out to about $7.92 a month. So looking at Lake Elmo, you've got a number of different types of residential lots around the city. You have a neighborhood like Union Park, with higher density, smaller lots. The Old Village with relatively small lots. And then you've got Torrey Pines, for instance, larger lots with larger homes. You have Lake Elmo Heights, our 2026 project. Those lots out there anywhere between 1.5 acres and 2 acres with a residential home. And all of those homes are giant houses. A lot of those homes were built in the early 90s and are fairly modest. So I guess what I want to hear from council is your thoughts on equitability. Do we look into expanding the categories associated with calculating stormwater utility fees, in particular for residential lots.
I think the one question I had was, and I may have gotten my questions answered in between when I had the original question and now, is how do we handle areas or properties that really handle most of their water through infiltration or ponding on their own and don't depend on, maybe they have some ditches or maybe, but I mean, how is that calculated in, or is it?
Yep, so currently, so like a newer development, for instance, maybe, right, where we have stormwater ponds that are constructed as part of the development of the property and infiltration facilities, those properties are still charged as like a unit, on a unit basis per lot. And that really goes to the fact, like I kind of kicked off with, is, you know, this is a community-wide, this fee funds community-wide programs for stormwater maintenance. So it's really, you know, if you look at legacy, you know, those lots are charged the same currently as a lot in the old village, you know. So, and yet, you know, a lot in the old village, you know, was you know, that a home there could have been built 100 years ago. And there isn't a stormwater pond necessarily. There is a stormwater collection system that we have as a community. And again, the maintenance required of that facility is similar to.
Maybe to be a little more specific, what about the 40-acre parcel that has basically a lake or a pond on this property that's collecting that, or not really impacting our streets or our stormwater?
Sure, so if we've got like a 40-acre property with a single home on it, I'd have to look at and know what the zoning is, you know,
Okay,
so.
so does some of the fees depend on the zoning for the property?
Yep. Yes, it does, absolutely. So like agricultural use so an old farmstead, for example, is gonna be categorized as a agricultural use.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that, as I look at our system, I think it's not particularly fair and equitable by a long stretch of the imagination. I'll go back to what you talked, Mayor. You have development where they have stormwater ponds and infiltration. And so they basically pay the cost of treating the stormwater within their development, and they pay the cost of stormwater throughout the entire city. That's not in any stretch of imagination fair and equitable. You know, you can't take it and say, well, you guys, you paid to build the pond, you pay to maintain it, you know, and then you pay to maintain the whole rest of the city, the same amount as someone who lives in a development where it just goes into the storm sewer itself, and everyone pays for that. We have lots that you saw already vary in size. We have agricultural lots, we have farm fields, we have a lot of diversity, and our system just doesn't provide an equity in that regard.
So the question I have is, when we have the ponding and infiltration ponds for the city, do the developments maintain those ponds? As I know, we were out clearing brush and things around some things
Some
last
do.
year. Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not consistent.
So there are some stormwater ponds and infiltration ponds that are owned by HOAs?
Yes. And some are owned by the city. It's not a consistent piece. And, you know, like Nate talked about, you have, you know, some lots that are 2.5 acres with these big houses on them. They got 10,000 square feet of impervious area draining into the stormwater system. And you got a house in the old village that's, you know, 900 square feet on a 2/10 of an acre lot, and they both pay the same fee.
So I have full confidence that any stormwater in your neighborhood is properly maintained and that the proper people are ensured it's done.
Of course.
Do we verify, do we have a process where we know HOA pond in X neighborhood is also being properly maintained as we're doing our MS4 stuff
They're required to submit an inspection report every year to the city.
to the city?
The city, yes.
I think that process is governed by the watershed district, with the city as a partner. But I guess I can't really expand on that.
It's, you know, I just think that looking at the system in its entirety, the diversity of the property types in the city, the fact we have some areas that maintain their own stormwater systems and others that don't, to make sure that what we're doing is, you know, treats everybody fairly with regard to the cost. I was thinking about this a number of years ago. I was at a conference and it was a stormwater system thing. And the interesting part was, you know, the biggest impervious area in the city is the streets. And so when they calculate the impervious area using average residential by lot or however you get there, right, they include the streets. And the cost for the stormwater system that's attributable to streets is then charged back to parcels based on their zoning, using the Transportation Society Engineering, whatever it's called, National Transportation Society Trip Generation Manual. And so they said, well, because if I put in, let's say, a Target store, and now I have turn lanes and all kinds of other things that generate more runoff, why should a resident be stuck with that bill? And so I'm not saying we need to do that, but there's a lot of things that are going on in this area. And as Councilor Holt and I was talking before, you know, the city of Duluth is engaged in a lawsuit over their stormwater fees and its equity. And the Court of Appeals just sent it back to the district court to be heard. And it centers around the equity of charges. Not that we don't have them beating on the door, but again, if we've taken a look at this equity, we are in a better position. And just to be fair to our residents and businesses.
So what would be some effective and efficient modifiers, maybe? I fully understand like splitting up additional residential categories. I get it. I assume the most effective way would be to have the exact square footage of impervious surface by parcel and then calculate how much they are putting into city-maintained things, right? That would, in a perfect world with AI doing that calculation.
There are actually some cities that do that, but they're far way the minority. And I'm not advocating for
Yes.
that. I think you can get into reasonable categories.
So then what are those, like, what's that ground where we are making sure we are doing it as equitably as possible? It's data-driven, based with a probable cause is not the right context. There's data to support that rate category. Obviously splitting up residential by more, maybe finding a way to impact it if a person is benefiting from a HOA maintained stormwater, even though that stormwater then is still feeding then into city stormwater down the road.
Doesn't feed into down the road. The retention pond, only if it overflows.
It doesn't go into Horseshoe Lake? Where
Only
does
if
it
it
feed to?
overflows.
So, like I said, the maintenance is for the city as a whole, right? So we could talk about, a privately maintained development, but like, really all stormwater within the city does, under most circumstances, the city's public system does see some sort of discharge, whether that's in those small events that you guys were maybe talking about, maybe Councilmember Dragicich was referring to, where there's no discharge. There's a design event for that stormwater capture. In a larger event, it's designed to overflow, right, to the city system. So there's that to consider, that the city system does indeed serve even those private, in the instance of having a private drainage treatment system.
But it doesn't serve in the same way.
So then what are some of the other variables that can be included that can be data-driven and efficient for implementation that we can start to use? I'm looking to anyone else. This is not my area.
You have some areas that don't have any storm sewers, it's just ditches. You know, you go out in some of the areas around the city, and they're just ditches, drainage ditches. They don't have pipes and manholes, and we don't go out there and, we go and maintain the ditches, but not nearly the level of maintenance required, you know, within the infrastructure part of the city. And yet, if they're a residential home, they pay the same fee.
So I guess, staying on the residential topic here, one easy thing is to look at, your different types of neighborhoods, you know what I mean? And I'll also add that measuring the impervious area of each individual parcel, that'd be a very tedious, time-consuming exercise that, in the long term, I don't think it's worth it. You have folks that may purchase a property and decide to tear something down or build something, you know what I mean? Therefore changing, and then it just becomes a tracking nightmare, you know what I mean? Keeping track of that. So holding it to some sort of, property type and lot size, I think is, and when I say lot size too, I'm not talking down to the square foot.
Yeah.
I'm talking generally.
So in our utility equations, we have property class codes, land uses, as you mentioned, and then the utility factor, using those. So would it be, it seems like kind of one thing, I'm hearing you saying that we're kind of maybe a little general in is the residential thing where we don't pull out townhomes versus homes. Because it looks like we have agricultural, which would maybe speak to that acreage and ditch use versus having curb and gutter and storm sewer, I would think as a generality. And again, I think we all need to understand that getting into the nitty-gritty is probably not an easy thing or a thing that the city wants to take on as a cost. I'll reference the Met Council and their WAC charges, right? They have to do that on a system-wide for the whole metro. They can't look at every individual business on its own. It would be a task that would be beyond comprehension, really. So when I think we look at their 24 square miles on the city, I guess I kind of agree with what we have in there, but maybe breaking down in the residential, or if there's some current land uses that we're not participating in that have class codes within them, I guess I would be good with taking a look at that to make sure we're looking at that.
I think, yeah, I agree with you, Mayor. I think, we break it down and say maybe, residential properties up to an acre, or, maybe half acre, up to an acre, and more than an acre. It's, Inver Grove Heights, I think, has 4 classes in their residential, if I remember rightly, based on size. And then I think the other piece would be, if they have some stormwater facilities, they should get a credit. I mean, I think
If they have stormwater facilities that they maintain themselves.
maybe we could advise them, they could apply for a credit, which is already allowed.
Jack?
There is a credit system that people can apply for. I'm not that familiar with it. It was Administrator Zuliger, when he was here, implemented a credit system, and so there have been some people
Yeah,
come in
it's-
and they demonstrate that they have a privately owned system on their land.
But the problem-
Yeah, if I could just speak to this, Councilmember, practices include installation of rain barrels, rain gardens, retention ponds, swale ditches, or man-made water courses, riparian area plantings, and other practices that may be deemed as intentional detention of surface water runoff. So they can apply for credit through that, right?
Do you really want 485 homeowners applying for credits, or could we do it on an HOA basis? That's what I'm trying to get to. I mean, in
What do you mean by an HOA basis?
well, like the Royal Golf Club,
Okay.
okay, there's 290 homes when they're done, okay? You want all 290 homes to apply for a credit, or could you say the people within these developments would get the credit.
Oh, I
and
think it
just
would-
process it once.
They would do it however they saw fit. It doesn't really say it has to be one day or another, when,
Well, it says, I get the sense of reading it that it doesn't allow a landowner. Well, you have 290 landowners.
yeah.
You're gonna have Limerick Village, you're gonna have 800 landowners.
So technically, wouldn't the HOA, using that framework, couldn't the HOA apply for the credit? Because the HOA is already charging the residents for its cost to maintain it. So then is the HOA, because the HOA owns properties there as well, as presumably paying fees.
They don't pay stormwater fees,
They don't?
not to my knowledge, no.
Would that be a mechanism to still use that and then go through the HOA as the recipient of credits for the costs that it's incurring to pay for its infiltration?
But you give them a credit for if they don't pay a fee. On the stormwater ponds, there's no fee.
Presumably, they would charge residents less for the costs that they are incurring.
But back up, they're not a stormwater utility customer. The HOA isn't.
So, but they use.
But they're maintaining the
They use
ponds.
costs to maintain the water retention facility, right? So, in that, if they had so they're not actually a customer that gets charged for it. So I see what both of you are saying, but there's no connection between
Can't ask
the
for
two.
rebate.
I was saying, we
Being
could
charged.
amend our ordinance to allow HOA to have stormwater retention facilities to, they could apply for a credit, and then the credit will go against the homeowners within there, or whatever landowners are within there would receive, a portion share of the credits.
Gotcha.
Trying to make it simple.
Jack, I'm sorry, Suzie, do you happen to know, and this is more of a historical question, like, I know that the Royal does have some ponds that they own. Is that general practice for some of the developments we've had over the last 15 years?
No, so we've been pretty consistent with the residential developments, and what Royal has is they have some land. So we take on ownership of stormwater facilities that are there for treating stormwater.
Okay,
So that's all owned by the city, and there are ponds in the Royal development that are owned and maintained and operated by the city. And Royal and other developments also have wetland areas or low-lying areas. One of the bigger areas in Royal Gulf was a floodplain area that takes flooded areas in the high water flood, and they were mandated when they were filling that in to build homes that they had to recreate and keep that storage somewhere else, so they have areas. Those outlots are owned by the HOAs, and they're
Okay.
not necessary, they're necessary for floodwaters, but they're not necessary for stormwater treatment. So they're not actually part of a actively managed
okay.
stormwater pond.
So but the stormwater ponds we're putting in, the new developers are putting in, Easton Village.
Those are all city-owned and
Those are all
maintained.
city-owned and.
Yeah,
taken care of. So they're not,
but they'll have wetlands and
Yeah,
they'll have
yeah.
other ponds and they look like ponds, they, act like ponds, they do capture water and things like that, but if they're wetlands and they're being protected as a wetland, we leave that on HOA land. We
Okay.
don't own
So
that,
not necessarily the same thing.
right?
Well, I would beg to differ, because the Royal has a stormwater maintenance agreement, and you're telling, we had this discussion with our HOA in the city. We said, why do we have a stormwater management agreement for something that's not a stormwater pond? So on one hand, you're saying it's not a stormwater pond. On the other hand, the city opposed to getting rid of the stormwater management agreement.
Yeah, if you go into the stormwater model and the permitting requirements, it's for floodwaters, it's not for stormwater management.
But the stormwater management agreement is for stormwater management.
There-
As specific
So the Valley
requirements.
Branch requires easements over all the properties, even if it's for flood management, and so that's where those agreements come in.
But this has other requirements related to stormwater that,
Yeah.
like I say, it's a double standard.
So there are, I would call them residential properties, but as we've grown more and we start getting into
Yeah.
new circumstances, so we're starting to get into medium and high density. Royers is a good example where you've got a large apartment complex, Amir is a large apartment complex. Those stormwater ponds are staying on private lands, and so
Okay.
there you will have residential properties that'll probably start to apply to this
Yeah.
fee that
Whereas
will,
we didn't really have those prior probably to this.
we did not. This system was
going
put in
in,
place
yeah.
pre-me, which is
Yeah.
pre-2006, so it's not even contemplating.
So I guess my
Growth and development.
recommendation would be that we look more at the residential use type and just keep an eye on the surface water management, the equations, and just make sure that we're capturing that to be equitable for new developments and the old developments, to make sure everybody's on the same page, I guess. That would be, speaking to this, that would be my request.
One more thing from the historical perspective too, especially going back and as we're a growing city, what we're growing into is, back when this was developed, there wasn't a lot of stormwater infrastructure anywhere in the city, even in your downtown, there wasn't much. If you look at traditionally what this fee has been used for, it's being used, there should be a base fee on all properties regardless of whether they have their systems, because we haven't been using the fees for stormwater infrastructure. We've been using it for studies. We've been using it for your surface water management plans that are required. We'll have to update that when you do your comp plan again. We've been using it for the MS4 program and rewriting your permits that are mandated by the EPA. So you're doing these citywide studies that are mandatory from regulatory agencies, the Valley Branch, things like that. And it's just a mandate that you have to do, and
Right.
that's where a lot of the fees have been going.
You guys are, Public Works is capturing the cost for unit hours and equipment hours based on when you're mowing around the ponds and you're cleaning out the ditches and you're cleaning out the culverts, right? To make sure we're in adherence to the MS4 requirements.
Yep, and we've been, just in the past 2 years, we've doubled our hours. And so, I mean, I see that continuing and expanding, increasing over the
Okay.
years.
We need good information going in, otherwise, if you have bad info going in, you get bad info coming out, so. Councilmember Dragisich, not that you don't have a lot to say, but I'd like to hear from the other council members if they have any thoughts on this.
I think your summary at the end of looking at the equations, revisiting it, I mean, if that was done before 2006 when that was made, it probably seems like the best place to start with collecting the data and going from that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I discussed my thoughts earlier, but I guess I'd be curious to know for nearby cities, you mentioned Inver Grove has 4. There's probably some cities that have 9, probably some cities that have 2. But each city also has different housing stock as well. And so whether that's 3, 4, or 5, I don't know what the right number is, but I would look forward to seeing a basis for what the recommendation is, if it's 4, if it's 5, and then why. Well, because the impact to, in this case, to stormwater is this for this housing type. But yeah, I think that is a very rational approach. In terms of the rebate, have people applied for it recently? In the last,
We have a whole string of rebates.
I would just like to say Stormwater Conservation has it on my property. There's no water that ever leaves my property, so they do have the topographical maps to show people. And I don't know what's gonna happen now since my property was single family home and now we're high density around us. I don't know how that will affect it. But right now, I think we're okay. But, when I check those maps, they don't really show whether water leaves the property or not, but does not leave that property. And that's what that was the property I know they got forgiven for having to pay the fees.
thank you.
In the Tri-Lakes area.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. I would be curious in terms of, especially for, we've talked about Royal, and are there any other HOAs that do maintain, if they have a stormwater pond or infiltration ponds, if they are sending in the reports as well? I guess it's not related to this directly, but I would be curious to know about that, as it still doesn't impact the system overall, but that's not a fee discussion per se.
Okay, we have a list of properties that have been given credits up to 75%. Nobody knows what the basis of those credits are. So revisiting those, are they, to
Yeah.
make sense and.
So let's revisit the credits and what they're for and what they're based on. And make sure they're still in good standing.
That
All
was-
right.
Yeah, that was the one issue I saw, is if you are granted a credit today, 5 years down the road, what's it look like that
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. All right, in the interest of time, I know this next topic is gonna take a little while, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley. Agenda item is 2026 budget discussion. We had a fairly healthy discussion at the end of August, right? So bringing this back to look at some of the requests by council at that time. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Hadler.
Absolutely. We'll see if I can get my presentation up faster than Jason did. Bam. No. Okay, so we are just trying to narrow down and finalize the number that we need for our preliminary levy at next week's meeting. And also just taking any additional input on the budget from here on out. So just as a follow-up, this is a follow-up to the August 9th budget workshop, where we introduced our draft budgets and received some direction from council. I summarized what I recalled from that direction was to decrease the levy from the proposed, use fund balance for some projects. Department heads were supposed to use their discretion, and then also adjust the CIP to decrease capital levies. So for the general fund budget, I've summarized kind of what some of the things that we've done to date. So we decreased the general fund levy by $400,000. And this does assume using fund balance of around $270,000 at this time. Expenses, we refined and removed some project estimates and costs based on additional information that we had received. Some minor revisions to some expense line items, and we're going to be doing this for the rest of the fall, kind of trying to fine tune that as much as we can. We decreased the grade for the 3 new fire captain positions. I did reduce the estimated health insurance increase. I'm a little concerned about that right now, given everything that's going on. But just kind of in the wider market, we'll have more information on that in the next couple months. I removed the contingency reserve. We haven't really used that in the past. And then we'll just continue to refine all of our expenses moving forward. So here is our new summary of general fund expenditures. So this is our budget, not the levy. So our budget is down to 8.8 million. So a change over 2025 of just over 1 million, which is an 11.2% increase. For the levy, so this is the property taxes that we're requesting. We, again, decreased that general fund levy by $400,000, assuming that usage of fund balance. We decreased the debt service levy slightly. That was just an error in my spreadsheet. And then for the CIP, so I've made some sort of tentative revisions to the CIP. I took, so if you will recall in my July presentation for the CIP, I had to make some assumptions about how much cash we were using. We're trying to move from, all bonding to use of some cash. With my initial assumptions, I had kind of a staggered approach for local streets. I used a flat rate for our transportation projects and mostly all cash for utility projects. For this revision, I took the idea of all new dollars, so everything that we're levying. So for 2026, my current proposed infrastructure levy is $400,000. And then all of our franchise fees, so our estimated franchise fees were $250,000. So we would take all of that $650,000 and use that for the projects for the year, which would just mean that we would not be growing that infrastructure fund as much as if we sort of dragged that out a little bit more. But anyways, so that's the explanation of how I came to that sort of scenario 1. Scenario 2, we removed all the projects that we believe are developer funded. And so my understanding initially was that there was a chance that these things would be developer funded, and therefore I wanted to plan for them in case they weren't. And so I had kind of implemented a rough estimate of what they might be contributing. If we presume that those things are only going to be developer funded, we can take those out, which of course, then we should not fund them because there's no plan for funding them. So that's scenario 2. Those were kind of easy, low-hanging fruits for me to do within my modeling. I know that we discussed revising the timing of local street projects. We can certainly discuss that further. It just gets a lot more complicated to revamp those numbers because engineering has to do that. As well as the fact that they wouldn't necessarily, like stretching those out a little bit doesn't necessarily have as big of an impact on our necessary long-term funding or the funding within that 10-year timeframe. Just wanted to note and make sure that we're kind of on the same page that capital levies should be strategic, a strategic implementation to fund both near-term and long-term capital projects. So when we're talking about what we need for a capital levy, we're talking about what we need next year, but we also need to look at what we need over 10 years and over 20 years. The city has over $123 million in depreciable assets. So if we're doing some really rough estimating, we should probably be levying closer to about $3 million per year to cover depreciation. That's a whole bunch of information I'll be able to talk more about as we get into the strategic planning or strategic financial planning moving forward, but we're well under what we should be levying in order to cover our current assets. So here's our capital levies revised. So again, infrastructure reserve is down to 400. I brought our city center CIP down to 50,000, which is the same as 2025. I removed the park CIP. Ballpark fund, this is an interfund loan, so we should leave that alone. That is repaying the sewer fund for the 76 acres that were purchased this year. And then we have our vehicle and equipment fund. Leaving that at 450, we've got really a good handle on what the funding structure for that is. So I'd like to kind of keep that in line. And then our street maintenance, I had increased that just to cover inflation. There's probably a little bit of wiggle room there if we wanted to revise that. So our total levy, we've brought it from the original requested to 12.2 million down to about 11.5 million, which takes our tax rate, our estimated tax rate, from 31.7 down to 29.57. And the levy increase from roughly 20% from our original requested down to 14%. I would also note that this change in our tax rate is 2.73 percentage points, which would, if we took out the ballpark purchase, would take it down to 2 percentage points, which is kind of going back to that original plan, which should be essentially expired at this point because we've had so many changes between now and then. But the tax impact on our median value home is down to $179, which is less than $15 per month. Our tax rate, obviously, still very low. Just kind of redid that graph. And then our questions. So essentially, do we have additional questions about specific expenditures? Should we continue with the revised levy amounts? Do we want to have some discussions on what that should be? And if changes are needed, what priorities and strategies should we revise?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions for Director Hadler? Councilmember Holtz.
Thank you, number one, for the work and taking the feedback. That's a drastic amount of work that was done based upon what you were provided. Are there specific areas of higher level risk that you see from some of the changes? Like areas where because I saw like Chief changed the grade for the 3 captains. Does that create a risk for our ability to hire and fill those positions? Are some of these changes, like, are there 1 or 2 of these changes? Obviously, the depreciation, to me, is probably the highest risk, that we're not taking into account our future costs as well as we should. Are there other things that, based upon these changes, where you think are top of your concern from the budget standpoint, besides depreciation?
I would need to defer to department heads as far as what those removals from their budgets would be. So with regard to the change in the grade.
No, I think when we initially rolled these positions out, we looked at our current step and grade plan that's in place and found a step that gave some room between our current staffing and where things could fall. Started with that number, and then as we got into it more, I was kind of already working on revamping that number before we got to this part of the budget process. Just couldn't get that change kind of in the budget documents in time. So it was kind of already in process when we had that to go down to the next step. And that keeps it more in line with where I see our department in the market, I guess. I don't think it's going to take away from any potential hirings because we're in a unique spot. I think it will still do us very well for the hiring process at that adjusted rate.
Right. 'Cause I'll be honest, that was my biggest concern coming in, but hearing the direct feedback from the man in charge does help. Thank you.
If I could just add, I mean, the risk to, and again, we'll talk about a lot of this stuff in the strategic planning part, and that's kind of the reason I wanted to do that study in-house, is so that we could address these things a little bit more than the studies that we've done in the past. But our risk is really largely long-term, right? We want to make sure the city is sustainable long-term, and making sure that we get our capital levies in place within a timely manner so that we can kind of be ready when things need to get replaced again. I would also just add that in the event of an economic downturn, and if we lose a lot of our development revenue, that would be a really big hit to our revenue sources.
Right. You know, my biggest concern is just the long-term depreciation of our assets in the city, and is he taking out some, it doesn't seem, doesn't seem like a big hit to the capital levy, but I think over the long term, when you're reducing debt, it feels to me a little bit of a bigger hit than that. There's some things I'm glad that didn't get touched. I think you did a good job at getting down to, the number that some people feel are appropriate. And as I see it, I'm okay with what you have here.
I took a look at it too and have a suggestion,
Okay?
which gets us down to about a 10% increase. It's just a suggestion. I sent this to the administrator and the finance director. I copied the mayor on it initially, but I thought I would just bring it for the other council members to look at. I think it helps us get down to a more manageable number, and they're just there. You can take a look at it, it's just for your information.
But so we get down to a 2.97, this magical 3 number that people are bandying about. Is still within that number, right? With fewer changes.
Well, it's a 10% increase in the levy versus a 14% increase in the levy.
And this isn't getting it down to a 3% increase in the local tax rate.
Yeah, about 3% increase.
This would still be about
People's property
8%.
taxes will go by about 3%. from the cities, for the increase due to the city. But it's just a thought.
So I mean, this speaks to, and, you know, a lot of the questions I have already been answered, so thank you to staff for answering those questions, and, maybe some of them would be helpful to bring up right now, I don't really know. I think it still goes back to, I understand that maybe, we are undertaxed for the services that we have, and we're in a situation where the debt is becoming too large, and we have to be moving in the right direction. I'm in full agreement with that. My concern with the process so far is I think we've been heavily focused on how do we increase the revenue side of it, with very little discussion about how do we, discussion or willingness of how do we decrease the expenditure side of it. And I am in favor of having these levies to help us start moving in the right direction. So yeah, 10 years from now, we're not $120 million in debt. But if we start making some of these changes, even if they aren't as drastic as is proposed, we're gonna start moving in that direction. Instead of taking 10 years to get there, or 15, maybe it takes 20. Maybe instead of getting to 20 million of debt, we get to 30 million, but that's still moving in the right direction. That still puts us in a good, much better financial position than if we do nothing. I think the initial, going from 26 to 32% local tax rate, I didn't know how I was gonna square that up with residents. We've had this conversation too. I haven't had a resident come to me and ask for, higher taxes ever, right? Like, we had a discussion of, well, what's wrong with high taxes? Because it's more services. It's like, okay, well, maybe, but some people want those, some people don't. So for me, it's a yes, we do need to look at this from a financial health of the city, but I also think we can't rip the Band-Aid off. I think we have to approach it slower, and that's where I'd still like it to be lower, but I think this is still moving in the right direction, where we look at some of the levies and and really using those to reduce the total levy. I went through line by line item and through the budget, and, it is lean. It's not that there's a bunch of wasted money in the actual budget itself. And, I had probably 15 questions of specific budget line items that I asked to staff. And there's a perfectly logical explanation for every single one of them of why we need it, right? So I don't want to go down that path of having to cut any of those or ask for those to be cut, because it shows that there really are, like, hey, there's a reason for all of them. With these levies, if we decrease that amount that we're levying each year, yes, that means we will get to that goal a little bit slower, but we're still working towards that goal. And I don't know why, because this has been the answer that I've gotten, is the no, and I don't understand why that wouldn't still move us in that direction.
If I may, Mayor?
Yes.
I think that what needs to be clear is that we don't know what the end goal is, because we don't have all of that information. I need a lot of information from engineering in order to be able to say, this is what is gonna make our city sustainable long-term. I know that it's not $400,000 a year for infrastructure. I know that, that's really obvious, right? And so when and again, it's like, I feel like this is we're chicken and egg, right? We've got this strategic plan that this whole process has made it crystal clear how important that plan is, and to make sure everybody understands the impacts of these decisions long-term. So it's coming, but this is not ripping the Band-Aid off. This is, I've structured this change over a 10-year period, and I might have us halfway there. I mean, this is gonna be, until I retire, we're gonna be slow walking us toward an appropriate tax rate.
And so I guess, but then the follow-up is, well, what if we take even a slower step, right? A 5-year slower step. and so the tax rate increases by, you know, an 8% increase each year rather than a 20% relative, increase in the local tax rate each year. I feel like it's a more palatable plane to land, for the residents. It moves us in the right direction. We're not doing anything. It's gonna help us move in that direction. It's gonna put us in a better financial position. It's gonna get us there a little bit slower, but that also gives residents the times to adapt to those financial changes.
When I see the infrastructure levy and the one that Councilmember Dragisich brings it down to basically half what the preliminary was of this year, I will say that, for me, that's not sustainable long-term for the city. I know many public works directors, city engineers that are struggling with the high cost of replacing water and sewer lines that have aged out, that are continually breaking. Maybe not to the point of what we have on this. I mean, we just experienced a sewer force main that's a 1.4 million that we didn't know about. And those things come up down the road. And then it becomes not, how are you gonna, you can't bond for it all. So then you're gonna raise levies to the extent that are unpalatable to residents because you didn't prepare for that in the past. And so when she takes $100,000 off there, I get it, that slows it down, that's fine. She took some out of the city center CIP. Okay, I get that, and that's actually the number that Councilmember Dragisich had in there, reducing. Street maintenance levy, it brings it down to what we had levied last year. Well, I can tell you right now that people are getting pay raises next year. They're not gonna be doing it for the same price they did it last year, so then you're just decreasing on what you can maintain. I'm not okay with that. And then the vehicle and equipment levy. I have certainty that our staff takes a look at their equipment every year, make sure it's in good repair, that it's not gonna break down. If it can be maintained, it gets maintained, and it needs to be replaced, and when it gets replaced, it's replaced due to, it's costing more to maintain than it is to keep it. So I guess that's where I'm coming from, and even this 8%'s less than what it was before, and it's not as low as it has been in the past. But I feel that's a slower progression, working towards the way we're gonna go.
The CIP levy doesn't pay for water and sewer. CIP levies for streets. Water and sewer are paid from the enterprise funds. So by suggesting we phase it in over one more year to get there, but it doesn't pay for water and sewer. The vehicle and equipment levy, the fund has $660,000 at the end of '24, and we have expected expenses of $265,000 in '25. So we have a surplus balance in there. So again, dropping it down a little bit isn't going to make equipment unaffordable.
Do our fire equipment come in out of that dollars? Yeah,
I'm just
so
telling
we
you-
already saw the increase in rates just from a ladder truck in excess of over $1 million. So I don't know that we can in my opinion, I don't think we can speculate that that's gonna maintain the same, or we'll have that cushion to pay for that down the road if and when it needs to be replaced.
If we have a surplus, though, wouldn't that kind of make the
But the
assumption of then that?
Can we
kind of-
clarify that, that's a capital fund, so that if you look at it's in the July CIP discussion, I map out the funding necessity for those capital needs. So we have a capital plan that has the vehicles and equipment that are replaced based on our policy in place. And then I mapped out a slow rollout, a 10-year rollout of trying to get to an appropriate funding level. And I worked in the interfund loans because we couldn't get to that appropriate funding level right there in order to pay for the ladder truck. So that's the one that it's like, okay, we've got this sort of dialed in of what these needs are for this. And yes, can we stretch out the actual purchase of a vehicle? Maybe. I don't know what, how often a dump truck needs to be replaced. Maybe. But right now, the plan is planned based on policy, and the funding is based on the plan.
Well, maybe it's more of a conversation of policy change, right, with the vehicle replacement fund. How often is it with most of the vehicles that we're replacing the vehicles? With the playgrounds, is it really 20 to 25 years that we need to be replacing playgrounds? I agree, right, they're looked at each year. It's not just because it's in the CIP, it means it happens, right? They're looked at each year, but it's it sets the tone, right? If it's expected that a playground is going to be replaced after 25 years, it's going to be on the CIP 5 years out, and it's going to be on top of attention. And when it gets time for it, like they usually get brought up and spent. That money gets spent.
But you put it in your budget because that's the expected life. You don't put in lesser than a budget, and then you come to the end of its life and then say, oh crap, where's my emergency fund? I mean, people don't budget for no straight income, maintenance costs in their house. If you know you need a refrigerator in 5 years, you don't just expect to come up with $2,000 that year. Typically, you're budgeting some money to put away in that fund. And maybe it makes it past 5 years. So then you don't spend that money, but you've got it there in case it happens. And I'm certainly not gonna, when you have a piece of equipment that is near the end of its life and it gets used, and then you get asked if $5,000 of maintenance will help extend it another year, but then the next year you go to use it and it breaks down, and then you end up renting equipment that costs you more than the $5,000 you were gonna use to maintain it, then you're falling back. So that, instead of doing the right thing, getting a good piece of equipment so you can work efficiently and use that for all of your stuff, you're not renting equipment, paying somebody else for the rental.
I don't know, to me, it still comes down to, if yes, in a perfect world, we would replace everything on their expected lifespan, and when those situations came up. But we have to somehow balance this when we're looking at what we're gonna set the tax levy for this year. And if I wanna look at that more long-term, then we do have to kinda look at it from a policy perspective. And again, I think the playgrounds is a perfect example of these playgrounds. Yes, they are looked at and inspected to see if they should be actually brought up for budget, but they're brought to us on a 25-year cycle, lifespan. That's when they're being brought up and suggested for replacement.
But that discussion was more related around, do we need playgrounds in every park, not if the playground is inspected and unsafe. So that, I don't feel that's the same comparison. And so then when we take if you don't right, you're budgeting for the worst case scenario and you don't replace it. But if you don't budget for it and then the emergency happens and you don't have it, then what's your answer? Then you just can't do it? Or you don't have it?
You're right, it's a tough situation, and that's where I'm trying to balance okay, there is a risk that, yes, we get in a situation like that 1 year.
Yep.
And that's not a fun situation to get in. But does that mean that we have to raise the tax rate this much for that level of risk? And I don't know if there is that level of risk, that if we have a $30,000 vehicle that we need to replace 1 year earlier than we expected, that we need to increase our tax levy by this amount. And that's what I'm just trying to balance.
And all I'm saying is that I feel Director Handler did decrease it down to a more palatable number at the 14%.
Well, and maybe a way to, so like going for the infrastructure reserve levy specifically, going from 500,000 to 400,000, right? We've talked about how that's gonna slow down our process to achieving more financial stability. What kind of impact does that have? What does going from 500,000 to 400,000, how does it change that timeline? How does it change the dollar amount that we achieve in 10 years of debt level?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that direct impact.
But it
because
improves
I changed
it,
a whole bunch
correct?
of
Sorry, it
I would
deflates
argue
is
it didn't
worse.
improve in it, because it's slowed down. So
Correct.
if you figure that let's say we want to be caught up in 10, we want to decrease it by X amount, and we're going to spend 10 years catching up to that.
Yes.
So now we've increased every levy moving forward by $10,000.
Yep.
Now, if we do that again next year, we're adding that on to the next year's levy. Does anybody want to say the words?
So, yes,
Kicking
it's
the
gonna,
can.
it's
We're
gonna,
kicking the
over the
can.
10 years,
Right.
be $100,000 or possibly less towards our goal. But it's still moving in that right direction, right? If we did $0 like we were doing a few previously, we'd be in that's why we got to $60 million of debt with this.
Right. I guess
And so if instead of looking to get to this number that you're talking about in 10 years that we're not really sure about, what if we said we want to get to that number in 15 years?
10 years is just my initial implementation, because that's the CIP window that I have to work within. If I'm looking, I can tell you right off the bat, if I'm doing a really rough strategic financial plan, which I'm working on right now, it is significantly higher than that. And it's going to take us 15 and 20 years to get that with pretty aggressive increases.
And so I guess the question is are we okay with that? Like,
I have Councilmember Dragisich wanted to speak.
Sorry.
All I was gonna say is, these couple of reductions, like in the vehicle equipment and street maintenance, are fairly minor. Considering we have more cash in them than we have expenditures projected in the current year. So reducing 50,000 and 30,000 is fairly insignificant in those funds. With regard to the levy reserve, so let's just, phase in over one more year. Let's go to 500,000 in 2027, just trying to get this tax rate down to something more manageable. I think our residents are gonna hang us if we go to 14%. Personally, but, that's every council person can vote their own mind. I think we have this plan, where the levy increases are gonna be 20% every year. And, I think we have to find a way to manage on both sides of that equation. I think planning for long-term capital is okay, and we need to do that. Fully funding depreciation, the part that's on the equation is we invest those funds and get a return on them. There's no investment interest, no net present value analysis that says if we invest it at historical interest rates, what do we really need? It's just we have $100 million, 100 years, you need $1 million a year. No, we don't. Because I'm assuming that our capital plan takes into account inflation, but our funding plan doesn't take into account investment returns.
Actually, I'm looking at everything in today's dollars at the moment.
Excuse me, what?
I'm looking at everything in today's dollars for the moment, because I'm trying to implement multiple scenarios, and it's easiest to just look at today's dollars. So actually, our depreciation is significantly, is potentially, I shouldn't say, is potentially understating our actual assets right now and depreciated assets. And again, that's why we need the study, and that's why I need more information from engineering, because we just don't know.
I guess the other would depend on what are you assuming as the asset life. Is the asset life reasonable?
Correct.
I mean, we put asset lives of 50 years on a sewer pipe, and they've been in the ground for 75 to 100.
Right.
Or you get the asset life of the CIP that rotted out underneath Hudson Boulevard and it had to get replaced within 10 years.
Well, you have some exceptions, that's correct.
Sure.
That's
So-
correct. But you pick what is the most average useful life. There's
Right.
many reputable studies out there that talk about what are the average useful lives. And I can tell you, it ain't 50 years for a water pipe or a sewer pipe.
And is the,
Some of them you would find 50 years if you're talking about City of Egan, some of their city pipes are running into that. Depending on your soil classes, you
Depending
can
on
run
your
into
soil
all
classes, yeah.
kinds of different things.
Yes,
that-
depending on your
that
soil class, you run,
deteriorate.
but again, on the average, they're much longer than that. St. Paul's pipes in the ground for over 100 years.
Well, yeah, you have wooden pipes that came out of the city of Anoka that we tore up in 2002 that were wooden. But I don't think they were really usable.
And they weren't in use.
Councilmember Olds.
Some of this is policy, some of this is philosophical.
Yeah.
It's, all of us want the city to be in a sustainable place. I presume all of us trust our professionals who are giving us guidance, because that is their subject matter expertise. I couldn't even touch an Excel sheet in the way you do, let alone figure out this cell is doing this with that. So we're all on the same page in there. It's, what is that sustainable place and how to get there? What I'm gathering, and the conversations I've had with friends about this, who, some do watch these meetings, credit to all you, to get to that sustainable place where it's 10 years or 15 years, because of all these assets that we have, our city infrastructure, which honestly, before being on council or planning commission, I never thought about. As a resident, I was completely oblivious to the sheer value of it. That's not something we think about. We think taxes pay for the salaries, which, yes, they do. But we never think about that future cost for replacement. I never did until I got in this chair and I sat between engineers. So, which is another story. But it's really, to Councilmember Hearn's question, like, yeah, is it 10 years, 15 years? What is the harm of having a slower pace of getting there? I can't necessarily answer that question myself. Just as I can't answer the question as to, is a 2 percentage point or a 2.7 percentage point, which one is one really more palatable than the other? Unless you do a survey from Morris Letterman, we're not gonna know that. So we're going off of the relationships we have with the community, our own perspectives, the conversations we have to try to see what we think is best. We know we have costs that have to be paid for. And Councilmember Hearn should get credit for taking the time to speak with staff about specific items and getting those questions answered. So kudos for that. That speaks volumes. And Councilmember Dragisich, yeah, you put in time and effort to throw out your ideas, so kudos for that as well. I would agree with the mayor on the aspects, say, the street maintenance levy. We invested $600,000 in it last year. And I understand what we said in response, but at the end of the day, the cost for doing the same work this year is gonna go up. That's the reality. Whether it's through the levy or there's a fund balance, I think at this point, talking about the levy, I fully support the 630. In terms of the infrastructure levy, which is really where this conversation is focused on, I would be under the impression that our finance director was not happy about even bringing it down to 400,000. And the only reason that was done was because of the feedback we provided. And if, from a financial perspective, it was probably pulling teeth to get to that point. And to me, that's where I also have to be able to tell constituents, look, it's not pulling off the Band-Aid, it's starting to maybe like peel it a little bit. Pulling off the Band-Aid would be literally having that levy be $1 million, because if, $2 million, because if she had her way to say this is the financially sustainable path, that rate would be at 38, 39, 40%. And yeah, we would be, rightfully so, be getting calls and emails and people in our driveways. I think this, at the 2 percentage points, plus the cost of the land that we purchased, I think is something that I can support, and I can explain why I support it to our constituents. I can. But, I mean, we each have our, as you said, we each have to have our own way of discussing it with constituents.
Right.
I think that's a great way to put it. I think it does come down to the philosophical side of it, of how do we want to approach getting there, and I guess, this is where it's always nice to get more feedback from the residents on this as well. Again, I haven't had a resident ever come ask for higher taxes from me.
You haven't?
Nope, haven't had that, but, I think it's also understood that they have to go up. It's just how much and how good of an explanation can I give for why they're getting there?
Really remember, our tax base is growing every year. And so the value of the taxable value and taxable tax capacity of the city is growing. And so the increase is on top of the growth in the tax base.
Well, so prior history had, basically was based on an increase of 250 homes per year. Okay? So that was maybe some historical stuff. And that's going out. I think this year we might hit 200 or right around there.
We're at 180
180 right now. So when you look at that, and part of the reason our taxes are low is because we do have the median house value in Lake Elmo is high, right? So that that lower percentage that goes out there. But when we start seeing a decrease in housing, potentially, we don't know, again, we're delving into speculation, right? But we're at 180 this year, we're not gonna hit the 250 that was kind of the number that previous administrations had focused on. That puts it at a lower number. I know that we have costs far above beyond some of our neighboring townships that don't invest in these sorts of things. If you talk to the people of West Lakeland Township, I can't remember what the exact number was, but they came to their city and said, we need to raise X amount of dollars because our roads are in bad disrepair. And it was a that thing. It wasn't a, oh, we planned for this, we've taken care of it where it wouldn't have hurt. It was a, we need this right now. So for me, my personal is I've enjoyed low taxes in Lake Elmo. Great, I've lived here 20 years, right? I get it. But I also appreciate having a fully funded, usable fire department. I appreciate the sheriff service that we hire out every year. I appreciate I appreciate the city water. Now, the filtration system was funded by grants, but we don't know if operationally for that stuff in the long term, if any of that's gonna be covered, right? So, for me, it's palatable, and I know there are a lot of people that don't understand what taxes pay for and what they take care of and how they help enhance living in a city like Lake Elmo. But I'm more than willing to sit down and talk to people, because when I look at like you said, going through it line by line, I don't find fluff in there. I find things that are needed in order to take care of the city in which the residents deserve it to be taken care of. But again, that's me.
My comment only was that if we left our tax rate the same, we would get more money because our base has grown.
Well, you'd also have more infrastructure to take care of. So the one thing that always kind of bugged me about when I worked at the state and the DOT was, you put all this money into new construction in Adeline on 694 and all these things. But then when the maintenance group for the department would go for more funding for another snowplow or more hours, the legislature wouldn't get them more funding for the maintenance. So just much like we talked about the gardens that have gotten a lot of great comments in downtown Lake Elmo, but if we hadn't have budgeted some maintenance on that, they would fall into disrepair certainly in a shorter amount of time frame. So the one thing is, yes, we're paying for the here and now, but we also need to plan for the upkeep of the future. And if my kids live here, I mean, I'm not gonna be around forever, right? I don't want them to run into they need a quick fix like that. And if it takes 10, 15 years to get up to that, well, at least we're going in the right direction to avoid that situation, in my mind.
And for context, the levy that they had to go out for in our neighboring community was over 8 million.
Is that for West Lakeland?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the impact for them, for their median household, was $490 a year.
Yeah.
That they had to do. And that, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's not our constituents, but I know on their end, it was a very volatile thing because there's now to the point where it had to be done. And they were in a place where, what happens if it doesn't pass? And I don't want our community to be in a position where we are at a place where this has to be done, but it's still at the discretion of, will it pass or not? I would rather slowly start to peel off that Band-Aid, not as fast as maybe we're being advised to, but I don't want to be in that place. And I think none of us want to. Like, we're all on the same page. It's going to be, what is that slope? What is that rate is really the discussion, so.
Sure.
And I think my point was just trying to slow it down just a little. to ease the impact just a little on our taxpayers.
I tend to be in the same boat. I 100% agree. We do not want to be in that situation, but whether it's 250, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, we're moving in that direction. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I keep on getting that.
Yeah, but
that
no,
look on
we're
that.
moving in that direction. It's just, again, getting back to Councilmember Holtz's comment, it's philosophical. And how quickly do you think you'd be in that direction? I think, part of that discussion is the longer you hold back on going more aggressively in that direction, your time frame, your time value of money, if you look at an economics chart, the further you get out, the more aggressive that percentage becomes and the harder it is to play catch up. It's not just saying, well, we're gonna do it in 10 years, so then if we do this, it's not a linear regression. It becomes compounding by percentages, right? Just like your 401k, you see that jump, it's like, wow, that really jumped. Well, so will the costs of increased infrastructure with more development, it'll really jump. So.
As you already said, depreciation for this is not taking into account of inflation.
And the stress tests aren't taking into account return.
Well, then it kind of cancels.
You kind of cancel, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just gonna point out, I don't know if you guys recall the spreadsheet that I did last year that kind of people can download from the website and they can figure out where their dollar is spent.
Yep.
I have revised that for 2026. I did it, the initial draft with my percentages, but whatever we decide on, we'll
Yep.
revise that moving forward. So if, you can always refer people to that, and I'm always happy to sit down with people and explain city finances.
I kind of feel like we've heard split direction on this.
I need a number for the levy.
Yeah, I'm okay with where we're at. We brought it down from where you were. I think it's palatable, but others have a different opinion, and I'm only one of 5, so.
I would also just remind you that we can decrease the levy between the September and December. We cannot increase it. So
True.
your final levy can always come down for this if we want to have additional discussion.
Maybe just with that being said, I know you mentioned the insurance you brought down quite a bit for the health insurance.
Not quite a bit, just a bit.
A
Just-
bit, okay.
Just to help try and decrease that budget.
Got it.
So,
Because that was one that actually kind of concerned me from what I've been hearing, that's been going up for everybody this year. So it's kind of one of those where I'd hate to.
Did not catch that memo nearly early enough. I
Yeah,
plugged that in.
So I don't know. I just don't know if I want to depend on that as being one of the decreases in the budget.
I mean, I don't know, it was maybe 10 or 15,000.
Okay, so it wasn't
It's just
okay.
one piece of many.
Okay.
Gonna
Anyone
stand
else?
here until I get a number.
I mean, my direction is the direction I'd like to see that number go is, again, I really do appreciate the changes that have been made and the staff all looking through and making cuts where they could be. I do still think that number closer to what Councilmember Dragisich provided here, where we're looking at that 10.13% in the total levy amount from the previous year, which would be, I just estimating probably about an 8% increase in local tax rate. I'm more comfortable with that. That's more the direction I'd like to see the numbers get. Again, I've given some suggestions of how I think we could get there. Staff, you still understand these better and what's needed. And so if there's a different way of getting there, I am open to that. But I think we've kind of given our ideas of how to get there if staff can't show us how to get there. I think this is a way of getting there.
I'm not comfortable with, and I appreciate the work on this, Councilmember Jackson, so I'm not comfortable cutting 250 from the infrastructure reserve levy. The only thing I could acquiesce to is probably some of the the 50,000 decrease in the vehicle and equipment levy, but again, not on the street maintenance levy for what we have to do next year with chip sealing and crack sealing and maintaining of the roadway system. That's not something I want to delve into.
I'd actually add to that too. I would agree with that if the infrastructure reserve we do bring down, which again, I still think is the main spot to focus on. I don't think then we change the street maintenance levy. I think we, kind of like we had in the previous discussion, we put more focus on the maintenance side if we're trying to decrease how much of the infrastructure reserve we need to be spending on the roads.
I agree, 30,000 isn't a lot. My only point was that we have sufficient amount of funds in there
Yes.
to cover, and the 30,000 is almost de minimis, but it does reduce the impact on the levy.
Yeah.
That was the only basis for it. But
And again, we can come back and decrease it, but we can't increase it once it's set. So if people change their minds on those things in the future, it can come down. Councilmember Cragnis, you have any comments?
Yeah, I tend to agree with what you brought, Carissa, because I think the 14% is, I think, more palatable to the community, and you brought it down to a better spot from the 20+% that it was. So I think that ripping that Band-Aid off, so to speak, and going a little quicker and just getting it done, I'm more on that side of the fence, the philosophical fence of just getting it over with.
I think we need to stop using the term ripping the Band-Aid off. This is not ripping the Band-Aid off, you guys.
No.
This is
So-
slow
so I
roll.
think-
Unrolling the Band-Aid.
Yeah. My suggestion for now is we keep with finance director's recommendations and then chew on a couple of these other items and maybe do our own homework on, or talk to the directors individually to see if that's something we want to bring down further in December.
the one thing you didn't comment on was the administrative overhead transfers from the enterprise funds, which could fund your infrastructure levy and still bring down our tax.
I'm sorry, the overhead charge to enterprise funds.
Yeah. Those are,
Can you explain that to me?
yeah, we support our overhead, our enterprise funds, a lot of overhead. We have, we have direct labor costs charged them, but like city council costs. We don't allocate any of that. We don't allocate legal, we don't allocate, like the clerk who may put stuff in. It's, it's a process you go through to determine how much should be allocated to your enterprise funds for citywide overhead. And actually statutorily, there's no limit, you can charge whatever you want. But there is a method to get there. I kind of did a back of the envelope calculation to come to those numbers. And so we would take those, transfer those as from the enterprise funds to the general fund or to the street levy fund, or whatever other fund we wanted to, and not, and not levy taxes for them.
So these back of the napkin numbers total $510,000.
From all three funds.
And that's money you're saying that could be used in some of the general fund?
Yep, could be used in any fund you want. It's just money that's available for any legal expenditure.
I think that topic might be worth pursuing. I trust your judgment more than mine on this one, but we do know, because we've had this discussion at a high level before, if there's a cost from the general fund that actually could be, for those watching, that it could actually be instead be paid for from the water fund, we should pursue that. And obviously, we've talked about this, like, staff allocate and say, I spent hours on this to make sure we're doing it. But if there are other, you're saying there are potentially other reallocations, shall we say?
For instance, a lot of cities own municipal liquor. I think Lakeville takes like 2.5 or 3 million from its liquor fund, puts it in the general fund.
But we don't have it.
No, I understand. It's just, it's an enterprise
I'd like to,
fund.
yeah, okay, I just want to deal with what we have.
Right, but my point being, you can take whatever you want. I think there's a method, the overhead allocation actually is a method to get there. And like I said, it's kind of back of the envelope, but we could offset some of the levy by that amount. Maybe you get to our 250 or 500, our street levy, from this
No, I appreciate that. I didn't, true honestly, I didn't completely understand that.
And
for
the
full
logic is that
disclosure.
ratepayers and taxpayers aren't the same people.
Okay,
The tax exempts.
all right.
And I could actually make a justification that those transfers are for capital expenses, so they could come from Saks and Wax. I can get there. Went to the Supreme Court, I can get there.
All right, for now, I think the direction is leave it as is. We're gonna do some homework and might have some individual conversations with people talking about, I'd like to delve into the overhead charges, enterprise funds a little bit. But I think for now, you've done a really good job at trying to make us happy. Never really gonna make us happy.
And again, if you guys are getting complaints or concerns or questions, feel free to send them my way. I don't talk to
Yeah.
nearly enough people in the
No,
public
we send them
these
to the
days.
mayor.
If they just send them to me.
And let me be clear, those are just my suggestions.
Yep.
I mean,
Fully understand. I would really appreciate you taking the time to do that. It's really us working as a collective, as a team, to try and make sure we're doing the best job for the residents that we serve, so.
one more point, it's not a backdoor attack on staff. I shared it with them a week ago, so they were well aware what my suggestions were, and they shouldn't have been surprised.
No, there's no surprise there.
Nope.
That's fine. With that, it's one of our longer workshops.
Future workshop topics.
Oh, what are the future workshop easy for me to say, topics? Ms. Miller?
Do you just want to know about the next workshop?
Yeah, what do we got on the
Okay.
table?
So, well, that'll be in October, so we're gonna talk about the old city hall, kinda, Jason will talk about like high level to get us thinking, cause we don't have a plan right
Yeah.
now for that. Jennifer's gonna talk about the, paid family medical leave and talk
Right.
about, her research and decisions that the council will need to make based on cost. Fire department's gonna talk about our current open burning permits.
Okay.
And evaluating that. And, this is subject to change. Poor Marty has had this sidewalk, trail snow removal ordinance. We just keep moving it
Oh.
based on workload. I also put on there Lake Elmo, no wake, see if we're gonna revisit that discussion. So those, depending on workload, he
Those
probably
might
doesn't
get
wanna
pushed.
keep bumping
Got a
it
few
up,
months
but
to worry about
mine might keep going down, so
Right.
that's kinda,
Well, I'm gonna make one last plug for the street dance, 100th anniversary celebration on Saturday. It should be a lot of fun. We'll have tents. How many food trucks we got?
7 food trucks.
7 food trucks. Rotary selling beer and seltzer. Got a band. Fly over at 5 o'clock. What are we having for fly over, Jeff?
Commemorative Air Force out of South St. Paul, 3 planes, with the premier one being a B-24 bomber from World War II.
Right. And then we'll have fireworks at the end. And we'll close up shop at 10 o'clock. Beer sales will be open till 9:30. And that'll be that. Looking forward to it. And looking forward to seeing whoever can show up there. Former Mayor Susie Dunn will be there as well. So, all right, with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Susie is giving